Chapter 1092. Spread the word. Nanzhou, Yunzhou, Linzhou, Huazhou, and Tongzhou will seize the city at the same time in 3 days. Wu Chuang couldn't help but shiver when he heard the young lady's voice. Nanzhou's governor had just left with the garrison of the 5 states, but someone had already set their eyes on the state capital. If the city gates were opened, he could easily sweep away the remaining soldiers in the state capital with a few hundred of his brothers, not to mention that there were so many powerful people around. It would be fine if these 20,000 people won Songzhou, but if they lost, they wouldn't even be able to return home. Without rations, they wouldn't be able to enter their homes, and there were pursuers behind them. The only path left was to be annihilated. From what this big sister said, it seemed that the small and medium-sized forces around Yunzhou, Linzhou, and Huazhou were also under their control. This time, they would seize 5 states. Within the borders of the Wu Kingdom, there were dozens of smoke and dust clouds, but there had never been a rebel king who could occupy 5 states at the same time. He quickly recovered from his shock and said loudly, "I'll arrange it right away." With that, he quickly left. He had gathered so many brothers, thinking that it would only be a small fight and loot during the chaos. He didn't expect it to be so big this time, and he was even a little excited and expectant. Those people would attack Princess Duanrong, and when the sandpiper and the clam fought, they would be the fishermen who reaped the benefits. Baisu walked in from outside and looked at Mississippi Liu. He asked, "Alliance leader, there are 20,000 people attacking Songzhou this time. Can Jiang of Silla and the others handle it?" Mississippi Liu stood up and said, "Even if there are 200,000 of them, as long as he says he can handle it, then he can handle it." Baisu looked at her and his lips moved, but he didn't say anything else. The alliance leader always had a kind of unreasonable confidence in Jiang of Silla. She sighed inwardly. When a woman liked a man, she would lose her judgment and think that whatever he did was right. Even an extraordinary woman like the alliance leader couldn't avoid this. She puffed out her chest out of habit. She could feel the pressure and restraint from him. She felt that King Jing was trustworthy most of the time. Nanzhou, Linzhou, Tongzhou, and other places were all part of the northwest of the Wu Kingdom. They were lower-middle prefectures, and the common people lived in poverty. Among them, Songzhou was the worst. Songzhou was located in the northwest of the Wu Kingdom, and was the closest to the fringe. It used to be the most chaotic and impoverished place in the Wu Kingdom, but that was only in the past. Things were different now. The people of the other provinces had heard a little about Songzhou's current situation. The bandits near Tsang Prefecture had been wiped out by Princess Duanrong, and the common people were no longer troubled by the bandits. The rich families who had caused trouble for the common people in Songzhou City were also purged one by one. The government offices of the various counties were thoroughly cleaned up. If the common people had any grievances, they could appeal at any time. In addition, Princess Duanrong also provided the poor commoners with the opportunity to work and reduce taxes. If someone volunteered to join the army, they would receive a generous compensation. It was truly a case of one person joining the army. The whole family would not have to starve. On the other hand, even if they hid in the prefectural city, they would often be bullied by ruffians and bullies. If they lived outside the prefectural city, it would be even more precarious. Every day they could live was a day of gain. Not only did the poor commoners suffer from the bullying of the rich families, but the government's tax system was also exceptionally strict. Every few days, there would be additional reasons to tax the common people. The common people were suffering unspeakably, but they had no one to complain to 2 years ago. When Princess Duanrong had taken over Songzhou, they had already envied the lives of the common people in Songzhou. After 2 years, Princess Duanrong had made a comeback, and their lives were even worse than those of the common people in Songzhou. This time, the governor had led 20,000 soldiers to attack Songzhou. Although they didn't know what the outcome would be, many of the common people even hoped that they would be defeated. Princess Duanrong would then take advantage of the victory to pursue them, and take over Nanzhou and Linzhou. Their lives would be 10 or even 100 times better than their current lives. At night, at the eastern city gate of Nanzhou's prefectural city, "All of you keep your spirits up. The provincial governor has ordered that if anything goes wrong in the next few days, be careful of your heads." When a military officer passed by the city gate, He gave a few words of warning to a group of guards before turning to leave. A guard curled his lips and muttered, "Why is he so fierce? He married his sister to the governor as the seventh concubine to obtain such a position. A vile person intoxicated by success." A person beside him reminded, "Be quiet. If he hears you, you won't be able to bear the consequences. We haven't been paid for a few months. Our family is almost starving. When will these days end?" The guard leaned against the wall and yawned. He sighed and said, "I hope that Her Highness the Princess can fight her way in. Yesterday, I heard from the people outside that if one follows the princess as a soldier, they will immediately receive silver. 1 tael of silver. If they live frugally, they can ensure that their family won't starve for half a year." The person beside him was silent for a moment before asking, "You really want to follow Her Highness the Princess?" The guard shook his head and said, "Ai, it's a pity that we are not fated to be in Songzhou. We have no chance. Dong, dong dong." In the distance, the sound of the night watch could be heard. 1 slow, 2 fast, 3 times. It's the 3rd night. The person beside him heard the sound of the night watch. He turned his head and grinned at him, asking, "Do you want to be a soldier under the princess?" The 3rd night watch. It was already midnight. In Nanzhou City, apart from the night watchmen and the occasional patrolling soldiers, the majority of the people had entered into a deep sleep. Countless silhouettes quietly appeared outside the East City Gate. Wu Chuang looked at the bald man in the lead knocking on the city gate, as if he was knocking on his own door. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. This was the city gate. If the city gate could be so easily knocked on, then what was the use of building such a thick and solid city wall? However, his expression froze the next moment. After the bald man knocked on the gate, the city gate of Nanzhou City really did open a crack. Moreover, it opened wider and wider. At the same time, the city gates of Yunzhou, Linzhou, Huazhou and Tongzhou all opened at the same time. Countless figures poured in from outside the city and went straight to the various government offices in the city. At the same time, in the camp of the Allied army of the 5 states that had been marching for 3 days, there was suddenly a chaotic sound of footsteps and fierce shouts. "Fire! The provisions are on fire! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Meet the enemy quickly! Put out the fire first, save the provisions first." In the camp, there was a commotion. In a forest several miles away from the camp, a young man looked at the old man in front of him, shook his head, and said regretfully, "It's a pity that we can't find their commander's tent. Otherwise, with Su's help, there would be no need to fight this battle." Someone beside him looked at him and said, "Their commander-in-chief is not that stupid to set up his tent in a place you can find. His Highness has already said that our mission is to burn down their rations. Once we complete our mission, we just need to go back and report. Don't make any more trouble. Sigh whatever, let's pack up and pack up." More than 10 Heaven List experts quickly disappeared into the dense forest. In the camp at the back, a man wearing ordinary armor asked with a gloomy expression, "How much is left?" A general knelt on the ground, raised his head to look at him, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and said, "They used kerosene. More than half of the provisions have been burned. What is saved is probably only enough for the entire army to eat for half a day." The man clenched his fists, gritted his teeth and said, "Outside Songzhou, fortify the walls and clear the fields. From here to Songzhou there are still 2 days of journey, at least 1 day, and the provisions can only last for half a day. Tell me, how should we fight this battle?" The general thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "If we send people back to transport the provisions, it will take at least 4 days to go back and forth. If we march urgently, we can reach Songzhou in 1 day. If we save some of the provisions, it will be enough to last for 2 days. If we can take down Songzhou in 1 go, we will have enough provisions." The middle-aged man said coldly, "What if we can't do it in 1 go?" The general said in a low voice, "General, there is a great disparity in military strength between Songzhou and us. We can definitely take down Songzhou quickly. If we return now, I'm afraid our morale will be greatly affected, and it will be very disadvantageous." The middle-aged man thought for a moment, and after a moment he said in a low voice, "Just in case, Send 2,000 people back to transport the provisions, and follow me to attack Sangzhou in one go. Chapter 1093. Li Duan had been practicing diligently these 2 days because Rui had given him a task before he left. According to the agreed time, Nanzhou, Yunzhou, and the other 5 provinces should have fallen into her hands by now. The 20,000 soldiers led by the governor of Nanzhou had to attack the impregnable Sangzhou and retreat to attack the 5 provinces. They could only run around like children without their mothers. It was truly pitiful. What was even more pitiful was that they still did not know this. Li Duan was also quite pitiful. After Rui left, he completely let himself go and neglected his practice. Now that Rui was about to return, he only knew how to be anxious. Su had led people deep into the front lines last night and burned the enemy's rations. The people south of Zhangzhou had all moved to the north of the city. They could not scavenge any food from the outside. There were 3 paths in front of them. The first was to return the way they came. If they were fast, they could return to Nanzhou in about 2 days. If they could take back Nanzhou from Mississippi Lu, the food crisis could be solved. The second was to send some people back to forcibly collect rations. They would wait in place, waiting for those who would never return, waiting for them to starve to death. The last path was to go all out and take down Sangzhou in one go. The rations in Sangzhou were piled up like mountains, so they naturally did not have to worry about food. They would know which path they had chosen in half a day at most. Of course, what Li Yi hoped for was naturally not to waste a single soldier, not to waste a single divine punishment, and not to waste a single artillery shell. No matter how disparate the strength of the 2 armies was, once the battle began, casualties were inevitable. Young Luqing had already donned her armor. She looked a little valiant, without losing her heroic spirit. In these few years, she had completely transformed from the young girl, who only knew how to follow behind Mississippi Lu in the 2nd year of Jinghe, into her current self. She had transformed into the princess of a country, the ruler of a country. Uncle Master. She walked to Li Yi's side and nodded slightly. This was probably the greatest battle she had ever experienced in her life. Li Yi nodded and asked, "Are you nervous?" She looked up with a smile and said, "Not nervous." Fearless in the face of danger, unflinching even if Mount Tai collapsed before her. As expected of his martial niece, she had some of his demeanor. Yang Liuqing sat opposite him and asked, "After this battle, will Uncle Master go back?" Li Yi nodded. He had previously told Yang Liuqing that he and Rui would leave after they had completely established a foothold in the northwest. After conquering the 6 provinces, for a long time to come, what they needed to do was not to continue attacking all the way to the imperial capital of the Wu country. Instead, they needed to rest and recuperate, gradually nibbling away at the outside world, and slowly accumulate their strength so that they could gain a foothold here. This period of time could be 1 year, or it could be 2 years. Once this stage was over, what followed next would be an irresistible force that could sweep away all obstacles. Of course, everything was subject to change. It was possible that in the following period of time, the emperor of the kingdom might choke to death while eating, fall to death while walking, or be crushed to death by a meteorite falling from the sky. In this way, as the only legitimate member of the royal family of the kingdom, things would be much easier for her to handle. Of course, the probability of this happening was too small. The emperor of the kingdom was now completely frightened. He holed up in the imperial palace and refused to come out. Wherever he went, he had to bring countless guards and imperial guards with him. Even if a few grandmasters joined forces, they could not do anything to him. Li thought about it carefully and realized that he seemed to have done something stupid. He had forcibly disrupted Emperor Wu's personal expedition. If he had come to conquer Zhangzhou personally, Li would have opened the city gates of Zhangzhou to welcome him. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Seeing that she seemed to have something to say, Li shook his head and said, "Uncle Master has done everything he could. You have to walk the road ahead on your own." "I understand." She nodded and looked at Li Yi. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. At this moment, a general strode into the courtyard and handed over a secret letter. He said loudly, "Your Highness, the enemy is already 30 miles away from Zhangzhou City." They had reached 30 miles away from Sangzhou City so quickly. This meant that Su had burned their food yesterday, and there was not much left. Otherwise, they would not be so anxious. Li patted her on the shoulder and said, "Go ahead." The tense atmosphere in Sangzhou City reached its peak at a certain moment. The commoners in the city watched the rows of soldiers shuttling through the city. They could not help but feel their hearts in their throats. This battle would determine how they would survive in the future. It was closely related to their survival. 30 miles. 15 miles. 10 miles. 5 miles. 5 miles away from Sangzhou City. A deputy general looked at a thin line in the distance. That was the city wall of Sangzhou City. He urged his horse to the front and asked, "General Pang, should we let the soldiers rest here first?" They had already traveled for half a day and were exhausted. It was not wise to attack the city at this time. The best-case scenario would be for the army to camp and rest for the night when they were 30 miles away from Sangzhou City. However, they had already used up all of their food supplies. They could not afford to delay for too long. "Rest here for an hour." The general nodded and said, "Prepare the siege weapons. We will attack the city in an hour." "Roger." The deputy general turned his horse around and said loudly, "Rest here. We will attack the city in an hour." On Sangzhou City's city wall, Chen Qing was holding a pair of binoculars in his hand. He muttered, "Why did they stop?" General Fan stood beside him. He turned his head to look and asked, "Are the red barbarian cannons ready?" A person beside him immediately replied, "General, all 100 red barbarian cannons have been loaded." General Fan was relieved. He thought for a moment and said, "Just in case, check again." Outside the city, the deputy general looked ahead and walked to the general's side. He asked doubtfully, "General Pang, why haven't they made a move?" General Pang looked ahead and asked, "How many soldiers are guarding Sangzhou City? Do they dare to leave the city to fight?" The deputy general nodded and said, "General, it's time." General Pang waved his hand and said, "Attack the city. Attack the city. Attack the city." The general gave the order and the army rushed forward. 5 miles. 3 miles. 2 miles. When Sangzhou City's city wall could be seen clearly, the deputy general's expression changed and he said anxiously, "General, they still haven't left the city. They haven't even pulled up the drawbridge. Could it be a trap?" Just as he said that, he heard a cry of surprise. "What is that?" He looked up and saw countless black dots landing on the army camp. Boom. Boom. Following that, he heard a series of deafening explosions. Soil flew everywhere and wails of pain could be heard. Following that, he couldn't even hear the deafening explosions anymore. All he could hear was a buzzing sound. In the army formation, the war horses neighed and raised their front hooves. They were in a mess and ran amok. Cavalrymen fell from their horses and were trampled on before they could get up. The entire battle formation was destroyed by the deafening explosion. The war horses neighed in fear and ran amok. After every deafening explosion, dozens of people fell. The fire and the deafening explosions caught them off guard. Divine punishment. This is divine punishment. A deputy general looked up, and his eyes were filled with despair. This was the Jing Kingdom's divine punishment. No, it was enough to destroy their army formation from so far away. Even divine punishment did not have such power. "Retreat, retreat quickly." Just as he shouted, he lowered his head and looked at the long saber that had pierced through his chest. He looked at General Pang in disbelief, and his head tilted to the side. For disturbing the morale of the army, they should be killed. General Pang gritted his teeth and said loudly, "This is a long-range attack. Once we reach the city wall, they can't do anything. Attack the city." Under the command of the general, the morale of the army quickly stabilized, and they quickly approached the city wall. The drawbridge under the city wall had already been pulled up. As they approached, more stones and logs fell from above. The soldiers who were approaching the city wall threw sandbags into the moat and pushed the bodies of the people beside them into the moat. Soon, they reached the bottom of the city wall and were greeted by rolling stones and logs falling from the sky. In just a short distance of 2 miles, thousands of the 20,000 soldiers had died. However, they couldn't retreat. If they couldn't take down Songzhou today, they would starve to death. Scaling ladders. Scaling ladders. Crash. Crash. Follow. Archers. Archers cover. Wei Liang waved his hand as he looked at the densely packed crowd below the city wall. Black balls were thrown down from the city wall one after another. Boom. 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 A series of deafening explosions and bursting flames wiped out all the enemies below the city wall. General Pang stood in the distance and looked at the towering city wall. His heart fell into a bottomless abyss. Chapter 1094. Dad, what's going on outside? Li Duan, who was practicing martial arts, ran over and asked Li Yi when he heard the deafening noise outside. Li Yi picked him up and put him on his lap. Outside, firecrackers are being set off outside. Firecrackers? Li Duan's eyes lit up. Dad, I want to see firecrackers too. Li Yi did not mind taking his child around when he was still young to see the world. But the bloody and cruel scene outside Songzhou City would leave a lingering shadow in his heart, not to mention Li Duan. He touched Li Duan's head and smiled. Go if you want to see it. Let Grandpa Su take you there. Remember to come back early. Your aunt will be back in a few days. She has been away for so long. Dwainer must miss her, right? Li Duan jumped down from his lap and said seriously, Dad, I don't want to see firecrackers anymore. Dwainer is a man, and a man must practice martial arts well. When Xiaomu grows up, I can protect her and not let her be bullied. I still have to protect Xiaorui, Xiaonyang, and many people. I can't relax. Dad, I'm going to practice. Li Yi watched him walk back to the yard and set up a fighting stance. His punches and kicks already had a little bit of momentum. Although he was everyone's baby since he was young, no one, including Rui, spoiled him. The 3-year-old Li Duan was more obedient and sensible than the 13-year-old Yang Fu. Li Yi was deeply gratified. He turned his head and looked outside. The sounds of explosions were still rising and falling. As long as the weather allowed, this thing was an unparalleled weapon, whether it was used to attack or defend a city. Unless there was a huge disparity in the number of people, they would have to sacrifice their lives. 20,000 against 10,000. If they didn't meet a godlike commander, there was almost no chance of victory. Obviously, the enemy's commander was not so smart to choose to use half a day to catch up and immediately attack the city without provisions. On the city wall, General Fan rubbed his hands and said, Damn it, I've been fighting wars for 20 years, but I didn't know that wars could be fought like this. As long as I stand on the city wall and throw stones, the enemies will come wave after wave to die. Isn't this like harvesting chives? Wei Liang looked down and saw that the enemy had already retreated. He ordered his men, check the casualties and take a break. Although the soldiers did not leave the city, there were still people who were injured by the arrows and stones of the enemy. Of course, compared to the thousands of casualties of the enemy, their losses were almost negligible. More than 10,000 people temporarily set up camp 5 miles away from Songzhou's capital. The atmosphere in the camp was gloomy. General Pang, they have the Jing Kingdom's Tian Fa. We can't win. What should we do? A deputy general had just opened his mouth to speak when he recalled the deputy general, who had been sacrificed by General Pang for damaging their morale, and immediately changed his words. General Pang thought for a moment, then said with a gloomy face, Rest for half an hour, then launch the second attack. Originally, they thought that Songzhou was still the original Songzhou. With 20,000 soldiers, they could easily break through the broken city wall and march straight in. However, the enemy had built such a strong city wall in such a short time, and they even had the Jing Kingdom's Tian Fa divine weapon, but they could not retreat. Without food, they had no way of retreat. They could only advance, not retreat. If they advanced, they might have a chance of survival, but if they retreated, they would die. The deputy general walked out of the tent and said loudly, Everyone, rest and reorganize. We will launch the second attack in half an hour. On top of the city wall, General Fan looked at the approaching enemy. He quickly finished a steamed bun with meat in his hand and shouted, Prepare to meet the enemy. A moment later, he looked at the enemies who were focused on attacking the city gate. A cold smile appeared on his face, and he waved his hand. Throw! Below at the city gate, thunder boomed, and with every boom, someone would fall. Every time someone fell, someone else would stand up from behind and forcefully smash a thick and solid tree against the city gate, giving off a muffled sound. Attack the city with all your might. Once the city gate is open, we will win. Crazed expressions appeared on their faces as they hit the gate again and again. Under their attacks, the city gate shook violently. The person at the front had an excited look on his face. He shouted, "The city gate is going to break soon. Use more strength, use more strength." Boom, boom. Dozens of people hugged the huge log and slammed it against the city gate. The thick and heavy city gate could not withstand such a powerful impact and creaked. Finally, after a series of collisions, the huge log directly smashed through the city gates, and the two city gates collapsed with a loud rumble. Then they saw the city wall behind the city gate. The person at the front rushed in excitedly and hit the thick city wall, and his head was bleeding. He raised his head and touched the blood on his forehead. He looked at the city wall in front of him, his eyes empty. Damn it! He collapsed to the ground as if all the energy in his body had been sucked out. City gate, city gate. They actually built the city gate. Who was the general guarding Sangzhou? Who made the decision to build the city gate? Was he a pig? For an army, the ability to attack was very important. Very important. If the city gate was sealed, although the enemy could not enter, they could not come out either. The enemy could pile up soil to make watchtowers, and use the watchtowers that were higher than the city wall to suppress the archers on the city wall. Then, they could dig through the city wall and enter the city. The enemy could also go around the city and attack the rear, leaving only a small group of elite soldiers to monitor. There was no more stupid way to defend a city than to seal the city gate. Although Sangzhou was already the northwestern city of the Wu Kingdom and had no rear, and although they only had one goal for this trip, and it was impossible to go around it, wouldn't they plan to counterattack by sealing the city gate? If the enemy did not counterattack, they would not be able to attack. If they could not attack, what would they eat? It was shameless enough to hide on the city wall and throw those terrifying things. Now they even sealed the city gate. Were they still human? Thunder rumbled outside. With just the few of them, it was impossible to dig through the city wall. The leader held back tears and shouted, "Retreat, retreat!" On the city wall, seeing the enemy retreating for the second time, Wei Liang turned to look at General Fan and asked, "Where did you learn so many tricks? How sinister! You flatter me." General Fan cupped his hands humbly and said, "It's all because Jiang of Silla taught me well." Jiang of Silla said that the enemy has no food and can't fight their way in. They won't be able to hold out for more than a few days. Wei Liang nodded. As generals, he and Fan Qiao both knew that sealing the city gate was usually the thinking of those civil officials. It was the stupidest thing to do. However, Jiang of Silla had let them know that nothing was absolute. After Sangzhou was the land of chaos. The enemy's goal was only Sangzhou, so they would not go around it. They did not have enough people to exhaust Sangzhou to death. Moreover, there were mountains of food in Sangzhou city. It was enough to exhaust the enemy dozens of times over. From the beginning to the end, they only needed to stand on the city wall and throw divine punishment. They did not even need to go out and fight the enemy head-on. In a few days, the 20,000 soldiers outside. Now that there were only 10,000 soldiers left, they would be defeated without a fight. Outside Sangzhou city, the army had retreated for 10 miles. General Peng sat in his tent, his eyes bloodshot. A deputy general opened the tent and walked in. He said in a low voice, "General, in the 2 attacks, our army suffered more than 6,000 casualties. There are still about 12,000 who are able to fight." After he finished, he looked up and said with difficulty, "General, our food has been used up." General Peng clenched his fists and loosened them after a while. He gritted his teeth and said, "Kill the horses." The deputy general's expression changed. "General, killing the horses can solve the emergency, but our cavalry will be crippled. If the enemy leaves the city, our combat power will be greatly reduced. Can't you see?" General Peng looked at him and asked, "They want to exhaust us to death. Pass down my order, surround Sangzhou." His voice was gloomy as he said, "Wait until the food from the rear arrives. then send people to the other provinces to collect it. I want to see how long the food in their city can last them. Chapter 1095. The allied forces of Nanzhou, Linzhou, and the rest of the 5 states set up camp 10 li away from Sangzhou City. They didn't dare to get too close. If they got too close, Wei Liang and the rest would let them have a taste of the red barbarian cannon. They also didn't dare to attack the city. The city gates were sealed. If they rushed to the bottom of the city walls, Sky Law would reap lives like harvesting chives. Logically speaking, after 2 attempts at sieging the city, they did not gain any advantage at all. In fact, they did not even touch the enemy, but they had already suffered such a huge loss. An ordinary army would have long lost their morale, and they would have been utterly defeated. Yet the other party was still able to maintain their composure. Either the other party's morale was high, or the other party's commander was a little girl. Chen Qing saw their actions clearly with the high-powered binoculars on the city walls. Without food, the enemy's general was decisive. They killed the horses to eat. Although this action could temporarily solve the problem of hunger, it was equivalent to completely giving up on the cavalry. It seemed like they wanted to hold on until the reinforcements arrived. He really didn't have the heart to tell them that their reinforcements wouldn't be coming back. When they finished eating the horse meat, and were dizzy from hunger and exhausted, General Wei would order the city gates to be opened. He would lead a new army that was full of energy and equipment to bombard them with Tian Fa and the red barbarian cannons to give them the final blow. The citizens of Sangzhou City could finally relax. Although when the enemy attacked the city, the rumbling outside made people panic, and the city was in chaos, but His Highness had won, and won so easily. In their hearts, they finally had confidence. Li Duan was also relieved. He had learned all the martial arts that little aunt taught him before she left. He wouldn't be spanked because he couldn't report back. At this time, it was already the 3rd day of the Allied forces attacking the city. On top of the city wall, Wei Liang put away the binoculars and said, "They have eaten all their horses. This morning they started digging wild vegetables to fill their stomachs. Let's starve them for another 3 days. 3 days later, we will go out of the city to meet the enemy." General Fan curled his lips. "Meet my ass. If they still have the strength to hold weapons after 3 days, I will be convinced." He walked to the edge of the city wall and said, "It's about time. Release it." "Yes." A few guards responded and lowered a huge curtain made of cloth from the city wall. Not long after, a horse galloped into the barracks outside the city. A moment later, a deputy general walked into the main tent and said in a deep voice, "General Pang, a scout just came back and said that they wrote on the city wall." The middle-aged man frowned. "What word?" The deputy general opened his mouth and said with difficulty, "Those who surrender will not be killed." General Pang slammed the table and roared, "Bastard! General, we've run out of rations. The soldiers haven't eaten well these past few days. Many of them are vomiting and having diarrhea. Why haven't the people who went to transport the rations returned?" A gloomy expression appeared on General Pang's face as he said, "I've already sent people to investigate. There will be news in at most 2 days. But the soldiers can't wait another 2 days. Since yesterday, hundreds of deserters have appeared." The deputy general looked at him and murmured, "General, let's retreat. Sangzhou is no longer the Sangzhou of the past. We can't take it." Clang! General Pang pulled out a long saber hanging at the side, and placed it on the deputy general's neck. He glared at him and said angrily, "Say that again, and I will behead you for disturbing the morale of the army." The deputy general's face turned pale and immediately said, "Please forgive me, General." General Pang removed the long saber from the deputy general's neck and said, "Pass down the order. Tonight at midnight, we will launch a surprise attack on Sangzhou." "Yes." The deputy general walked out of the tent and wiped the trace of blood on his neck. His face was slightly gloomy. Outside the tent, the patrolling soldiers were pale and moved slowly. As they patrolled, the weapons in their hands fell to the ground, and they bent down to pick them up with great effort. They looked weak and lifeless, like zombies. Cries of anguish could be heard from the various tents. These days it had been nonstop. In a certain tent, Dozens of people were gathered together. Their faces were sallow and emaciated. One of them gulped and said weakly, "What is the general thinking? There's clearly no more rations. Why aren't we retreating?" As soon as the words came out, several voices immediately came from the tent. "Yes, I told them 3 days ago that the troops escorting the rations will arrive soon. It's been 3 days, and the wild vegetables and tree barks near the camp have all been eaten up. Why haven't they arrived yet?" Didn't Brother Chi say that he saw with his own eyes that a banner was hung on Sangzhou's city wall, saying that those who surrender will not be killed, and there will be meat to eat. Those who surrender will be given military merits. Is there really such a thing? Shut up. A person walked in from outside the tent and shouted angrily. The people in the tent shuddered and shrunk their heads back. They whispered, "General." Discussing defecting in the army was a capital offense. Just like those deserters, their heads were hung in front of the formation after they were captured. If they were not the general's personal guards, they would have already knelt and begged for mercy. The deputy general looked at them and said, "Who gave you the guts to discuss this in the tent?" "General, we are wrong." The few of them knelt on the ground and said in unison. The deputy general stood where he was and looked at them. After a while he said, "Chi-san, come with me." The scout called Chi-san was called to another tent. The people in the tent looked at each other with flickering eyes. A short while later, the scout called Chi-san returned to his tent. Another hour passed, and the rest of the people walked out of their tents and entered the other tents. On the city walls of the Zhangzhou's capital, Wei Liang received an arrow from a soldier and removed a paper tube from the end of the arrow. A smile appeared on his face as he tossed it to General Fan beside him. They wanted to send people over at midnight to secretly break through the city wall. What a good idea. General Fan pursed his lips and said, "Tell the brothers to perk up for this general tonight." It was midnight. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. There were no stars in the night sky. The entire city of Zhangzhou was shrouded in darkness. Outside the city walls, a black shadow was slowly approaching the city walls. "Even the heavens are helping me." Behind the crowd, General Peng looked at the pitch-black night and ordered, "After entering the city, think of every way possible to hollow out the city wall. The others will cover the attack." Gulp. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard. A person beside him held his stomach and whispered, "General, I'm sorry, I can't control my stomach." General Peng frowned and glared at his personal guard. "Bear with it for a while more. When we enter the city, you can eat as much as you want." As soon as he finished speaking, a large fire suddenly lit up on the city wall. He was only stunned for a moment before he immediately said, "Attack the city." Poof. The sound of a sharp sword piercing into flesh could be heard. General Peng was very familiar with this sound. Just a few days ago, he had pierced his sword into the chest of the deputy general, who had disturbed the morale of the army. At this moment, another deputy general stood behind him and whispered in his ear, "General, I'm sorry. His Majesty only wants you to live because you want to conquer Zhangzhou. However, we also want to live. Only by following Her Highness can we live and have meat to eat." He slowly pulled out his sword and said, "So General, please die." General Peng clutched his chest, the light in his eyes frozen. The deputy general threw down the blood-stained sword in his hand and said loudly, "General Peng is dead. We are willing to surrender." The hundreds of soldiers beside him put down their weapons and said in unison, "General Peng is dead. We are willing to surrender." Countless people in the distance stared at the people in front of them in a daze. They saw the group of people kneeling on the ground, and when they heard the words "General Peng is dead," they were momentarily stunned before they put down their weapons and knelt on the ground. "We can't surrender. We can't surrender. You are committing treason." There were many different voices, but these voices did not last long before they were drowned out by the voices around them. Chapter 1096. Filling one's stomach and ensuring one's survival were the most basic requirements of a human being. The commander of the allied forces of the 5 provinces had already been killed by the rebellious deputy general. No one knew what he was thinking. As the commander, he had actually committed such a grave mistake. Under the circumstances where the entire army couldn't fill their stomachs, he still gave the order to attack the city even at the cost of his life. When Wei Liang and the others left the city to receive the rebels, they didn't encounter much resistance. Those who resisted were all taken down by their comrades. Over 10,000 people consumed a lot of rations every day. However, Yang Liuqing couldn't bring herself to abuse captives. Fortunately, Sangzhou wasn't what it used to be. What they lacked the least was rations. For the time being, there wouldn't be a food crisis. Wei Liang and the others reorganized the surrendered soldiers in the shortest time possible and brought them out of Sangzhou. Nanzhou, Linzhou, and the other places were now in their hands. They had to bring these people back to defend as soon as possible to prevent any new changes. Up until now, Yang Liuqing and the others had already taken control of 6 provinces. The troops under their control had also reached more than 20,000. Sangzhou had already become the rear. Some people were left in Sangzhou, while the others had to head to Nanzhou and the other places that had already become the front lines. 20,000 troops wasn't a lot. The next step was to further expand the troops. They were already familiar with this. Under the attraction of the high benefits, in a few months, the troops in her hands would multiply. When Nanzhou and the other 4 provinces had completely settled down, she would also have a mighty army that could attack wherever she pointed, win every battle, and conquer every city. In an era where most countries still used cold weapons, as long as they didn't encounter the Jing kingdom that had the omniscient view, after some training, with heavenly punishment, cannons, flintlocks, and all kinds of firearms, they could sweep through everything in their way. Nanzhou, Linzhou, Yinzhou, Huazhou, and Tongzhou had fallen at the same time. The allied forces of the 5 provinces had suffered a crushing defeat in attacking Sangzhou. The governor of Nanzhou had died, and the allied forces had been absorbed by Princess Duanrong. From then on, the forces led by Princess Duanrong had already occupied 6 provinces in the northwest of the Wu Kingdom, becoming a well-deserved hegemon. Once this news spread, it spread rapidly within the borders of the Wu Kingdom. Fuzhou. Fu Province was also located in the northwest of the Wu Kingdom, but unlike Nanzhou and other places, it wasn't under the jurisdiction of the imperial court. Several years ago, Emperor Wu had started a rebellion, killing his brother and father. After he ascended to the throne, the provincial governor of Fuzhou used the excuse that Emperor Wu had gone against the will of heaven to rebel against the imperial court. He called himself the Prince of Kong. Because Fuzhou had the advantage of the terrain, it was easy to defend and hard to attack. In the past few years, the imperial court had tried to encircle and suppress them several times, but to no avail. They had taken advantage of this opportunity to expand and strengthen themselves. Right now, they were one of the top powers in the northwestern region of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, he could only count to 3 now. At this time, the former provincial governor of Fuzhou, the current Prince of Kong, had lost his usual composure. He paced around the mansion until someone walked quickly into the hall. He immediately raised his head and asked anxiously, "Is there any mistake in the news? Did Princess Duanrong really seize 5 provinces, and the allied forces of the 5 provinces were defeated?" The young man who walked in nodded and said solemnly, "Your Highness, we still don't know the specifics. However, including Nanzhou, the flags of Princess Duanrong have indeed been hung in the capitals of the 5 provinces. According to the news, right after the allied forces of the 5 provinces led by the governor of Nanzhou left, the capitals of the 5 provinces were seized by someone on the same night, and the government offices were taken over. We originally thought that it was the fishermen who reaped the benefits when the sandpiper and the clam fought. However, we didn't expect that both the sandpiper and the fishermen were actually Princess Duanrong's people." Prince of Kong was silent for a moment and asked again, "Rumor has it that Princess Duanrong has Tian Fa of the Jing Kingdom. Is this news true or false?" "This news has not been confirmed yet." The young man pondered for a moment and said slowly, "I only heard that when the allied forces of the 5 provinces were 2 li away from the capital of Zhangzhou, a meteorite fell into the army camp. Its power was not weaker than Tian Fa of the Jing Kingdom. As a result, the allied forces suffered heavy casualties, and when they attacked the city, the thunderous roars could be clearly heard from more than 10 li away. Then it should be true." Prince of Kong murmured. Could it be that Princess Duanrong has defected to the Jing kingdom? His face was filled with uncertainty. Fuzhou was not far from Nanzhou and other places. If they pushed forward, they would soon reach the city of Fuzhou. He was confident that he could withstand the attack of the imperial court, but not the Jing kingdom's Tianfa. Prince of Kong thought for a moment, and revealed a worried expression. Let's wait and see for now. Spiritual state. The faces of the provincial governor of spiritual state, the governor, and the important officials of the state were filled with fear. They really conquered 5 provinces. Hurry! Send a message to the capital. Spiritual state is in danger. In a conquered province in the south of the Wu kingdom, a few famous rebellious kings had gathered together. Princess Duanrong is making a comeback? Sangzhou, Nanzhou, Linzhou. They actually conquered 6 provinces. If we wait until they grow up, won't they become obstacles on our path to greatness? The Wu kingdom was already a pool of turbulent waters. What Princess Duanrong did in the northwest was like a huge stone thrown into the water, creating waves that could stir up the entire Wu kingdom. In the northwest, both the officials and the rebels were panicking. They were worried that they would become the next Nanzhou. In other places, their vigilance toward Princess Duanrong increased by several levels. In the imperial study deep in the palace of the capital, several eunuchs and palace maids knelt on the ground with their heads lowered, shivering. The Force Emperor had smashed the imperial study into a mess. He had pushed down the bookshelves and overturned the tables and chairs, but he was still angry. After kicking over several eunuchs and palace maids, he roared hoarsely with blood-red eyes. Useless. All of you are useless. 5 provinces can't conquer 1 Sangzhou. What's the use of raising these useless people? His face was full of anger, but few people could see a trace of deep fear hidden behind the anger. He picked up the overturned chair and sat on it, panting heavily. Come, Your Majesty. A eunuch walked in from outside the palace and bowed slightly to the Force Emperor. Send an urgent message from 800 miles away. Inform all the relay stations that if they meet that female senior. He let out a sigh and said, Tell her that I already have news of that Su Tian. As long as she helps me kill Princess Duanrong, I will tell her where Su Tian is. The eunuch looked up at the Force Emperor and said in a low voice, But Your Majesty, we don't know where the person she's looking for is. I'm the Emperor, the ruler of a country. She's also a citizen of the Wu Kingdom. What's wrong with me telling her to kill someone? Does she have the right to bargain with me? Looking at the Force Emperor who had suddenly become furious, the eunuch lowered his head and said in a low voice, As you command. After Yang Liuqing and the others seized these provinces, the officials of the Wu Kingdom near Nanzhou didn't make any moves. However, the major rebel forces in the area all sent people over to express their goodwill. They were afraid that Yang Liuqing's next move would be to point their cannons at them. In fact, this was completely unnecessary. They had just taken over such a large area, and didn't even have enough time to govern and expand their organization. They didn't have the time to pay attention to them, and they didn't need to express their goodwill. When the matter here was over and the 6 provinces, including Sangzhou, Nanzhou, were united, they didn't need to express their goodwill. Sooner or later, they would use cannons to blast open their city gates. Of course, one wouldn't slap a smiling person. Even if they were enemies, they couldn't turn hostile at this time. Wei Liang and the others even brought the envoys sent by the various forces to watch a military exercise. Tianfa cannons were fired. It was said that when they saw the red barbarian cannon blast 2 li away and raze a house to the ground, some people couldn't even stand properly on the spot. If they didn't need to use force or cannon to blast open their city gates, it would naturally be best if they could take the initiative to surrender. Rui had returned 2 days ago. They used the same method they used on the bandits in the Bedlam lands to purge all the bandits in the 5 provinces. They didn't have to worry about the security of the 5 provinces in the future. But after they left, they had to pay extra attention to the safety of Yang Liuqing. If something happened to her, then everything they had done before would be meaningless. After a period of time, Rui would leave with him. Su definitely wouldn't be willing to stay. She still had the experts from the Lu League by her side, and her own strength wasn't weak either. As long as the other party wasn't a grandmaster, there wouldn't be too much of a problem. Although the possibility of meeting a grandmaster was too small, it was better to be safe than sorry. Li walked out of the courtyard and looked up at the sky. How good would it be if a grandmaster could fall from the sky and stay by her side to protect her? In a certain province of the Wu Kingdom, an old man with white hair and beard was riding on a horse. There was a faint trace of worry on his face. He clamped the horse's belly tightly and shook the reins. There was only a trail of smoke left on the official road. The smoke was pointing in the direction of Zhangzhou. Chapter 1097. According to Li Yi's plan to nurture an empress, after they took over the 5 prefectures, they shouldn't be in a hurry to expand. Instead, they should focus on construction first and forge the 6 prefectures in the northwest into an impregnable fortress. Then, even if they were to go against the imperial court's army, they would have the confidence to contend against them. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Chen Qing and Fan Xiao had led their troops to take over their new territory early in the morning. A few days ago, some of the major forces in the surrounding areas had sent people over. Wei Liang had kindly brought them to watch a military exercise to broaden their horizons. Who would have expected that the next day, the overlords of 3 prefectures would come to surrender and express their willingness to follow the princess to conquer the world? They had been lying low for many years and had endured for many years just to wait for such an opportunity. Perhaps they had betrayed the imperial court back then just to wait for such a wise ruler. Or perhaps it was because on the day of the military exercise, Wei Liang and the others weren't stingy at all. Dozens of red barbarian cannons fired at the same time and razed a section of Zhangzhou's old city wall to the ground. Overnight, the forces that they could control in the northwest had increased by 3 more prefectures. In this way, the entire northwest of the Wu Kingdom had almost fallen into their hands. On top of that, all kinds of crushing firearms had already infiltrated the members of the holy religion in the prefectures and prefectures. It was no different from playing a game of landlord. They had already gotten 2 kings and 4 twos. If they lost such a good hand, it would really be God's will. Greetings, Your Highness. Greetings, Your Highness. Yang Liuqing's popularity in Zhangzhou had reached an unimaginable level. In the entire Zhangzhou, there were many people who had set up longevity tablets for her. Along the way, many commoners who saw her directly knelt on the ground and kowtowed nonstop. Those who won the hearts of the people would win the world. If she wanted to be the empress, the commoners of Zhangzhou would definitely not have any objections. Even now, there were still many commoners who came to the princess's residence to deliver things every day. Sometimes it was a handful of vegetables, and sometimes it was a few eggs. When they walked back, there were still a few people in front of the princess's mansion. They looked into the mansion, only wanting to see Her Highness's heavenly face. Seeing this, Li Yi was relieved. Lu Meng would continue to expand in the Wu Kingdom and temporarily move their headquarters to the Wu Kingdom. In the places they recovered, the brothels would also be gradually built to cooperate with her to unify the minds of the people. In terms of business, there would also be people in charge to drive the development of these areas. Only when the people had a rich life would they remember her kindness more and more. Now that she had gained a firm foothold here, it was time for Li Yi and Rui to leave. In front of the princess mansion, a guard looked at the woman in front of him who was carrying a child and said, "Sister-in-law, it's not that we don't want to accept it, but we have rules. We don't take a needle or thread from the commoners, not even an egg. If it weren't for you, the 2 of us would have long since died in the chaos. I don't have anything to repay you with, princess. I'll leave this basket of eggs for you to feel at ease." With that, the woman quietly put down the basket, picked up the child, and turned to leave. The 2 guards sighed. The people of Zhangzhou really liked the princess. They had to experience such things dozens of times a day. Another white-haired old woman walked forward. She didn't have anything in her hand. She was probably here to try her luck and see the princess. A guard walked over and said, "Old lady, you should go back. Her Highness has just returned to the mansion. She probably won't leave today." The old woman looked up and asked, "Is Princess Duanrong inside?" The guard looked at her and thought that the old woman's hearing was bad, So he raised his voice and shouted, "Old lady, the princess has just returned. Come back tomorrow." The old woman glanced at him and said coldly, "You don't have to speak so loudly. No one thinks you're mute." After saying that, she turned around and left. The guard looked at her and felt that this old woman was different from other old women. She came here not to see the princess, but not to take an egg inside the princess's mansion. Although she was leaving with Rui and the others, there were some important things she had to tell Yangliuking before she left. This was a small independent courtyard. Li Yi sat with her at the stone table in the courtyard. He picked up a teacup and moistened his lips. He said, "Being supported by the people at the bottom is your advantage. However, it's far from enough. They can help you sit in that position, but they can't help you govern the country. In addition, you have to win the support of the scholars." Before Li Yi finished speaking, he looked up and saw an old woman walking into the courtyard. He stood up. The princess's mansion was heavily guarded. There were also many guards at the entrance of the small courtyard. Even Wei Liang and Chen Qing needed to be notified before they could enter. It was a strange thing for an unfamiliar old woman to appear here. In particular, she was just standing there casually, but she gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. The old woman walked into the courtyard and looked at Li Yi. She asked calmly, "Where is Princess Duanrong?" Yangliuking's back was facing the door. She was about to stand up when Li Yi walked to her side. He put his right hand on her shoulder and pressed it down. He asked the old woman, "Why are you looking for Her Royal Highness?" "Someone asked me to take her life," the old woman said lightly. Her figure flashed and her speed increased sharply. She slapped Yangliuking. As soon as she opened her mouth, Li Yi had already grabbed Yangliuking's shoulder and pushed her to the side. He raised his hands and met the old woman's palm. He took a few steps back. There was a trace of surprise on his face. His chest felt uncomfortable. This old woman was even stronger than Rui. At this moment, the old woman had already turned her palm into a claw and was about to grab his neck. 2 years ago, Li Yi was already able to enter the top 20 of the heaven list. In these 2 years, because of the tortoise breathing skill, his strength increased every day. Every time he fought with Bai Su, who was already in the top 5 of the heaven list, he had a 50-50 chance of winning. But he still could not withstand a single move from this old woman. Even if she was not a grandmaster, she was extremely close. Facing her claw, Li Yi's expression was calm. He stood still. The old woman's body also stopped. One of her hands was already placed on the young man's neck, but she could not move an inch further. She could not use any strength, and it was extremely difficult to use her inner force. Beside her, the young woman's slender white hand was placed on the old woman's neck. She looked at her calmly and gently said 2 words. "Let go." The old woman released her hand from the young man's neck. The young woman also let go of her neck. 2 of her major acupoints had been sealed just now. At this moment, she could only use less than 10% of her peak kung fu. This 10% of her strength could not even compare to the young man in front of her, let alone the young grandmaster who had sealed her acupoints. The old woman was tied up by Bai Su, who had rushed over. Li looked at Rui with a puzzled expression. "Grandmaster?" Rui nodded. The high and mighty grandmasters in the past did not seem to be so powerful anymore. Li suddenly had confidence. Perhaps in this lifetime he could also touch this level. As if reading his thoughts, Rui shook her head and said, "She was injured, and it was not light. Otherwise, I would not have been able to subdue her so easily." Li was also a little hurt. He looked at the old woman and thought to himself that Su's words really could not be trusted. There were no other grandmasters in the Wu Kingdom, but this old woman was one. If it were not for Rui today, he and the future empress would have been in danger. Speaking of Su arrived. He was still outside, but his voice had already come from outside the door. "I heard that you have caught a grandmaster. Let me see." He was holding a drumstick in his hand. He took a bite of it, held the drumstick in his mouth, and walked over quickly. Halfway there, his body suddenly stopped. His eyes widened and his mouth opened wide. The chicken drumstick he had bitten off fell to the ground. Then, his figure gradually faded in front of Li Yi's eyes, and finally disappeared. leaving only the drumstick with one bite missing on the ground. Li watched this scene with his eyes wide open until the residual figure disappeared. A grandmaster was so terrifying. Chapter 1098. As soon as Su stepped into the yard, he saw that the old woman, who was tied up by Su, had disappeared without a trace. Su Tian. Then a harsh voice came into Li Yi's ears. The reason why it was harsh was that the voice contained too much resentment, surprise, disbelief, and some indescribable emotions. It was complicated and indescribable. The old woman's chest heaved, and her face turned from white to red and then to white. Puff! She suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and her face became paler. The rope tied around her was broken by her. As soon as Li Yi became vigilant, her body turned into a shadow and disappeared from his sight. Li Yi stared in the direction of the gate of the yard, and then looked at Rui. Rui shook her head and said, "She broke through her acupoints on her own, which greatly damaged her power and made her injury more serious. If she doesn't take good care of herself, she will never be able to return to the supreme power realm." Li Yi knew what would happen if someone broke through their acupoints by force. When they were in Shuzhou, Rui also broke through her acupoints by force to save him. The result was that the heroine Mississippi Lu became even worse than an ordinary woman. She needed to be fed, carried to bed, and dressed. He took care of her meticulously for several months before she got better. The heart-wrenching Su Tian just now was still echoing in his ears. Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end and he shuddered. With such heavy resentment, Su must have an irreconcilable feud with her. She didn't hesitate to break through her acupoints and destroy her own foundation to chase after him for revenge. Unfortunately, even if she was at her peak, she might not be a match for Su. Now that she was seriously injured, it was even more impossible. Li held Rui's hand and walked out of the door. If they were too slow, they might miss an annual drama. It was very likely to be a drama with many twists and turns. Bai Su and Yang Liuqing looked at each other and quickly followed. Outside the princess palace, the old woman stood on the street and looked around. That person's figure was already gone. She seemed to be in a daze as she screamed, Su Tian, come out. You had the ability to do such a thing in the past. Why don't you have the ability to come out now? Come out." Outside of the princess's mansion, there were already many commoners gathered. At this moment, they were looking at the old woman in the middle of the road with astonishment and confusion. Li Yi held Rui's hand and stepped out of the princess mansion. The door of the princess residence was broken, and no one knew who did it. What did he do? Li Yi looked at the old woman who was on the verge of going crazy. Could it be that when Su was young he also had a romantic debt? How could someone fall for someone like him? This old lady didn't seem to be blind. Xiao. A figure dashed over from afar and stopped 30 feet away from the old woman. It was a white-haired old man. His hair was messy and he looked travel-worn. He looked a little flustered. He looked around and saw the broken door of the princess residence. Then he looked at the old woman and said hoarsely, "You've already done it." The old woman didn't seem to see him. Her eyes were unfocused as she said hoarsely, "Su Tian, come out, come out." "Crazy woman, what did you do to Qing?" In a rage, the white-haired old man's body swayed and appeared in front of the old woman. He pressed his palm on her shoulder. The old woman took a few steps back and spat out blood again. However, she didn't fight back. She just stood there and stared blankly in front of her. Li Yi looked at Rui. Before he could say anything, Rui nodded slightly and said, "Grandmaster." Su had once said that it was impossible to see a grandmaster here. In just a quarter of an hour he had seen two. Strange Su was indeed Strange Su. His words couldn't be trusted easily. "Crazy woman, I won't argue with you for chasing me all the way here. But you harmed Qing. So I'll make you pay with your blood." On the long street, the old man looked at the old woman. His face was full of anger. He said in a stern voice and slapped the old woman's chest. Bang! This was not the sound of his angry slap landing on the old woman's body. Out of nowhere, a foot stretched out and kicked him in the chest. He flew backward and fell to the ground in a sorry state. He took a few steps back and patted his chest. When he looked up, he was suddenly stunned and said in shock, Strange Su, why is it you? Then he pointed at the old woman and said, Quick, help me catch her. I have an irreconcilable hatred with this crazy woman. Don't let her escape. Su looked at him expressionlessly and said indifferently, Get lost. The old man was stunned. Then his face became extremely ugly and he asked, Su Tian, what do you mean by this? Su ignored him and turned around to help the old woman tidy up her clothes. He carefully wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and sighed. You might not be able to return to the Grandmaster realm for the rest of your life if you force your way through. Why bother? The old woman looked at him and said with a smile, I became a Grandmaster so that I can catch up to you one day. When I catch up to you, being a Grandmaster means nothing to me. Li didn't expect that one day he would eat Su's dog food. Indeed, one couldn't judge a book by its cover. Even the sloppiest person could show off dog food. The white-haired old man looked at the opposite side and said again, Su, shut up. Li glared at him. Su, what Su? Don't you know how to read the situation? The old man patted the footprint on his chest, and his breathing became heavier. It had been a long time since someone had talked to him like this. If it weren't for the fact that he was still seriously injured, if it weren't for the young woman standing next to this kid giving him an extremely dangerous feeling, if it weren't for the fact that he had not figured out the situation over there, he would definitely make this kid suffer. Right now. Imperial Uncle. A voice came from the front. When the old man looked up, he was startled and blurted out, Qing. Yang Liuqing walked out of the princess residence and saw the white-haired old man. She was surprised and happy and asked, Imperial Uncle, why are you here? The white-haired old man quickly walked over and looked at her. He asked, Qing, are you all right? Did that crazy woman do anything to you? No. Yang Liuqing shook her head. That's good. The old man let out a long sigh of relief and looked at Rui and Li Yi. He asked, Who are they? Yang Liuqing looked at Rui and Li Yi and said, Uncle Master, this is my imperial uncle. Before I met Master, he was the one who taught me martial arts. Then she looked at the old man and introduced, Imperial Uncle, these are my Uncle Masters. You have a master? The old man frowned and looked at her. He asked, What about your other master? Is he also a Grand Master? Yang Liuqing looked at Rui, who had just walked out of the residence, and introduced, Imperial Uncle, this is my master. With the old man's eyesight, he could naturally see that although the young woman in front of him had extraordinary strength, she had not reached the Grandmaster realm. Not a Grandmaster? The old man's frown deepened. If he's not a Grandmaster, what makes him qualified to be your master? When Li Yi saw that Mississippi Lu had changed from hugging the sword to holding it, he knew that she was starting to get angry. Rui suddenly turned around and looked at Mississippi Lu. She said, This old man is seriously injured. Don't argue with him. Based on Li Yi's understanding of Rui, who had shared a bed with Mississippi Lu for many years, she did not want Mississippi Lu to suffer any grievances. Therefore, the meaning of her words could be put in another way. Rui, this old man is seriously injured. He's no match for you now. You can beat him up if you want. Based on his understanding of Mississippi Lu after sharing a bed with Mississippi Lu for one night, Mississippi Lu must have understood the deeper meaning behind Rui's words. Li Yi had a tacit understanding with the two sisters. He caught the scabbard that Mississippi Lu threw at him like a lackey. However, a cold light suddenly appeared in the eyes of the white-haired old man. He was shocked and quickly retreated. He shouted angrily, What are you doing? Yang Liuqing's master. Mississippi Lu looked at him and hugged the sword. Lu Rui, please advise me. Chapter 1099. The old woman, who had an inexplicable relationship with Su, was already seriously injured. Then, she forcefully opened her acupoints, which worsened her injuries. Later, she was hit by Yang Liuqing's imperial uncle, the white-haired old man, who was also a guru. Coupled with her emotional fluctuations, her body was almost at the end of its tether. Fortunately, both Rui and Su had preserved their peak strength. The two gurus worked together to stabilize her injuries. She was still in a coma at the moment, but her life was no longer in danger. As for Yang Liuking's imperial uncle, the white-haired old man named Yang Wanli, after giving advice to Rui, he looked even more disheveled. He came out after changing his clothes and said something to Yang Liuking. Everyone who became a guru had their own martial arts. They would have different understandings after learning from different gurus. Rui seemed to have realized something again, and hurried back to her room for closed-door training. In the past few years, not only had Li Yi made rapid progress, but Rui had also been busy fighting for territory everywhere, but she had never neglected her practice. Unfortunately, she had not broken through that layer of window paper. Apart from Miss Rui, your second daughter's aptitude is the best I've seen in my life. Su's eyes were full of praise. He said, although she has not reached the guru level, a guru may not be able to do anything to her. Once she encounters her own opportunity and breaks through to the guru level, even I dare not say that I can defeat her easily. Opportunity was an illusory thing. You might encounter it tomorrow, or you might never encounter it again. It was as good as not saying anything. However, to be able to make Elder Su say that he didn't dare to say that he could defeat her easily, that was really impressive. One had to know that the Taoist nun was also a guru. In Elder Su's eyes, she was the kind of person who could be easily beaten up and taught a lesson. Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, what about Mingzhu's aptitude? She has excellent aptitude, but her heart is tired. Su shook his head and said, if this goes on, my martial arts will not improve, and I won't have any hope of becoming a grandmaster in this life. Li Yi's heart ached. Mingzhu's dedication to martial arts was not inferior to Rui's. One of her biggest wishes was to become a grandmaster one day. But Li Xian, that bastard, had handed over such a big country to her to manage. How could she have the time to practice hard? However, there were also benefits to this. He was now able to fight evenly with Bai Su, who was ranked 5th on the heavenly list. If he took a step forward and Emmingzi took a step back, it would be equivalent to Emmingzi taking 2 steps back. After a while, when he returned to the capital city, wouldn't he be able to turn over a new leaf? It was not easy to become a grandmaster. It was not something that could be achieved through hard work. He now understood that sometimes chicken soup for the soul did not work. Those who could become grandmasters were people with excellent aptitude. This fact was actually very cruel. Some people were born to be grandmasters. Even a sloppy person like Su had amazing aptitude. Some people, no matter how hard they practiced, had limited aptitude and could only stop below the grandmaster level. Li Yi looked at Su with some expectation and asked, what about my aptitude? You. Su looked at him and twitched the corner of his mouth. Hee hee. Hee hee. It was used to express mockery, disdain, perfunctory, end of chat, and awkward silence. Li Yi knew that compared to Emmingzu, Rui and Enrui, he was indeed not a person with amazing aptitude. But he did not have to make this expression of a toad wanting to eat swan meat. Li Yi was silent for a moment, then suddenly looked up at him and asked, Su and Senior Tian, what on earth is going on? Who wouldn't hurt each other? You stab me, I stab you back and forth, fair and just. Senior Tian was that old woman who was a grandmaster. This time it was Su's turn to be silent. He was silent for a moment, and was about to speak when Li Yi reached out his hand and said, don't say it first. Let me guess. The story of the two of them was actually not difficult to guess. Based on old Su's obsession with martial arts, the words that the old woman shouted on the street, and his expression of love, hate, resentment, and joy when he looked at old Su. If he was so stupid that he couldn't even guess this story, how did he get Rui, Zumo, and Ruaching? Why don't I tell you a story first? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, once upon a time, there was a woman in Jianghu who vowed to become a grandmaster. When she carried a sword and rode a horse, she decided to march on the road of a grandmaster without stopping. Suddenly, a man appeared and hugged her tightly, telling her that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, see all the romance in the world, and taste all the warmth and coldness of the human world. Old Su buried his head even deeper, letting Li Yi know that his train of thought was correct. The woman was very happy when she heard these words. She broke her sword and let go of the horse, wanting to spend the rest of her life with him, see all the romance in the world, and taste all the warmth and coldness of the human world. But when she looked back, he was gone. Li looked at him and said, "This is the story of a heartless man abandoning an infatuated woman. Are you that heartless man?" "I let her down." Elder Su sighed, then shook his head and said, "But there's one thing you're wrong about." "What is it?" "She is not a woman in Jianghu." When he said this, there was a rare gentle smile on his face, and he murmured, "She is a young lady from a rich family. She doesn't know martial arts, but she is well-read, good at singing and dancing, and good at playing the zither. At that time, when I was practicing, she would always play the zither for me." Wait. Now was not the time to eat dog food. Li couldn't help but interrupt him and asked, "You said she doesn't know martial arts?" If he wanted to refute him, there was no need to find such a flawed excuse. If a grandmaster didn't know martial arts, then what were they? Su shook his head and said, "At that time, she really didn't know martial arts. Logically speaking, when she was a teenager, she didn't learn martial arts. If she didn't know a cheating martial art like the turtle breathing skill, there was not much hope for her to become a grandmaster in this life. But that old woman should have been a grandmaster for a long time. In such a short period of time, she turned something rotten into something magical." Li felt that he might have found a shortcut to becoming a grandmaster. With a face full of expectation, he asked, "Then how did she become a grandmaster?" "Because she has a good aptitude." Su looked at him and said with a face full of disdain, "Her aptitude is far better than mine, thousands of times better than yours." Li felt like he had been hit by another arrow in his chest. The older the ginger, the wiser the fox. After going around in circles, he was still asking to be humiliated. However, when he looked up, he found that Su's face did not look proud at all. Instead, he looked a little pained. Li sighed and asked, "Do you regret it?" "I don't regret pursuing martial arts. I regret betraying her." Li thought for a moment and asked again, "If you regret it, why don't you go to her? Why did you leave the Wu Kingdom?" "Because she has a good aptitude." A few black lines appeared on Li's forehead. It was enough to hurt his heart once or twice. Was there an end to it? Su looked ahead and said, "Back then, I made a bet with someone. Whoever became a grandmaster first would be the winner. For the sake of my reputation, I left her and cultivated in seclusion." Li still didn't understand and asked, "What does this have to do with you leaving the Wu Kingdom and not going to her?" "As I said, she has a good aptitude." Looking ahead, Su looked a little frustrated and said, "After I left, she began to practice martial arts. Before I broke through to the grandmaster level, she had already broken through." Li was stunned, and then his expression became strange. This might be the saddest story he had heard this year. Su continued, "After she became a grandmaster, she began to hunt me all over the Wu Kingdom. I had no choice but to leave the Wu Kingdom. Later, I didn't dare to go back to the Wu Kingdom, even after I became a grandmaster. Before I became a grandmaster, I was no match for her. After I became a grandmaster, I was still no match for her. All these years, I've been desperately practicing martial arts and improving myself, just so that one day, I could come back above board. But I didn't know that after she broke through, she couldn't let go of the knot in her heart. Over the past decades, her martial arts didn't improve but regressed." Li was right. Su was indeed a man with a story. The story was full of twists and turns, with many twists and turns. It was unexpected but reasonable, and it could be called the first tragic drama of the year. Thinking of the most important thing in this story, Li looked at him and asked, "What about the person who made a bet with you that year? Has he become a grandmaster?" Su looked to the other side, where the white-haired old man was talking to Yangliuking. Looking at his white hair, Li then thought of the old man's desperate practice in the past few years. It was not difficult to imagine how much he had suffered in the past decades. Then he thought of the old woman who was still in a coma. "What a sin," he sighed, patted Su on the shoulder, pointed to the white-haired old man and said, "If I were you, I would drag him out and bury him alive." Chapter 1100. Because of a bet, a pair of lovers had been separated, and the two had spent decades in entanglement and pain. Lovers had become enemies. Such people would go to hell if they died. Li couldn't care less about Su's affairs. He still owed a lot of romantic debts, so he was not interested in or qualified to care about other people's affairs. He sighed, stood up, and was ready to go to Rui to see what was going on. Rui couldn't overcome that hurdle. He finally had the hope to catch up with her. Now even Su said that although she couldn't beat a guru couldn't do anything to her. His dream of becoming the master was ruthlessly shattered again. Wait a minute, Su suddenly said. Anything else? Lee looked at him and thought to himself that this guy was really an unromantic guy. His old lover was hurt so badly, but he didn't stay by her side. Instead, he was here chatting with him. Even if he didn't know how to make a woman happy, he should have just asked. Did he have that mouth just to chew on a drumstick? Why didn't he know why he had been single all his life? He should have been more careful. Su looked up at him and said, although you don't have a good aptitude for martial arts, you know how to make a woman happy. Teach me. Li shook his head and said, you're wrong. I don't have a good aptitude for martial arts, and I don't know how to make a woman happy. You can ask the one who made the bet with you. Maybe he knows. If he knew, he wouldn't have lived alone for the rest of his life. Su looked disdainful, then looked at Li Yi and said, I take back what I said just now. Although your aptitude is mediocre, with the help of magic skills, it's still possible for you to enter that realm in the future if you have the opportunity. Li felt that his greatest weakness was that he was soft-hearted. Even though he had just been stabbed in the heart, he thought about how Elder Su had helped them a lot over the past few years. Elder Su had worked hard and was often abused by second great-uncle, so he sat down. Considering your situation, I won't teach you the 36 stratagems of picking up girls. You can't be so boring. I'll teach you the 500 lines of love first. Remember it carefully. Su was actually quite amazing. He didn't need to pick up girls, and the girls would come to him on their own. Their relationship was also vigorous and not conventional at all. Being hunted by a grandmaster-level lover all over the world, hiding for decades. How could there be a second romantic love like this in this world? This kind of romance could only be compared to the first day he came here, when Rui snatched him up the mountain and gave him to Rui. After a while, Su walked out from inside and said, that senior has woken up. Li looked at Su and gave him an encouraging look. Su took a deep breath, stood up and walked inside. Li saw Rui and Ruoqing walking over from the side. Rui looked at him and asked, how come I've never heard of hubby's 36 stratagems for picking up girls? I've never heard of 500 lines of love either. Where did hubby use those words of love? Li was stunned on the spot. Rui looked at Ruoqing and asked, have you heard of it? No. Ruoqing shook her head with a smile. Rui looked at him and asked, did you say all those words of love to Sister Zuemo? Many people had died in Sangzhou. Zuemo felt that Li Mu was still young and not suitable to stay here, so she took her back to Rui City very early. Li couldn't explain himself for a while. In all honesty, he had always treated them with sincerity. He had never used these superficial things without any sincerity. Ahem. What are you talking about? How can I favor one and discriminate against the other? There's no such thing. Li coughed lightly and said, let's go watch the fun and bring me a handful of melon seeds. Su had been insensitive for decades and had only learned a little theory. It was difficult to apply it to practice. Li was really worried that he would mess things up. That senior was already seriously injured. If he was a little more agitated, the consequences would be unimaginable. He sat on a stone chair on the other side of the yard. From here he could see into the room. He ate melon seeds while paying close attention to the situation in the room. In the room, the old woman was lying on the bed with a pale face. Su walked over, put a quilt behind her, and helped her sit up. Then he sat by the bed. The two of them didn't look at each other and were silent. The frequency at which Li ate melon seeds slowed down. After waiting for a while, he saw Su take out something from his sleeve and say, do you want some candy? Although they were far away, Li still saw it clearly. It was a piece of White Rabbit creamy candy. White Rabbit creamy candy. He had just said that women like surprises and romance. From time to time, he would give them some small things. They didn't need to be expensive to please them. How did he interpret small things as White Rabbit creamy candy? Li felt that he should give up. In fact, He and Yang Liuking's imperial granduncle seemed more compatible. However, what happened next was completely out of his expectations. Su handed the white rabbit creamy candy to her and asked, "Do you want some candy?" The old woman on the bed nodded and said, "Yes." So Su peeled off the wrapper and put the milk candy into her mouth. He asked, "Is it sweet?" The old woman nodded again. "Sweet. Sweet, it was really sweet." The melon seeds in Li Yi's mouth tasted like dog food. He vaguely understood one thing. Whatever methods of picking up girls, whatever theories, they were all fake. As long as the girl's heart was filled with you, there was no need for any other tricks. Even if you gave her a piece of white rabbit creamy candy, it would still be a trick. He suddenly remembered a sentence. That day he accidentally saw a book called Mandarin Duck Handkerchief in Mississippi Lou's room. There was a sentence written in it. He forgot the original words, but the general meaning was that if a man really liked a woman, he would love everything about her, even if it was something bad in the eyes of others. On the other hand, when a woman liked a man, it was the same. In this very feudal era, the author of the book was really a god to be able to write such a thought-provoking philosophy in the room. The old woman looked at Su and asked, "Don't you have anything to say to me?" "Yes." Su thought for a moment, looked into her eyes, sighed and said, "There was once a sincere love in front of me, but I didn't cherish it. When I lost it, it was too late to regret it. If God could give me a chance to start over." Bah. Li Yi spat the melon seed skin on the ground. He couldn't listen anymore and turned to leave. Before leaving, he looked back and saw the old woman sitting there in a daze. Her face was touched, and tears flickered in her eyes. When Li Yi walked past Yang Liuking and the old man was talking to her. "This time, you were able to conquer these provinces in the northwest. It is indeed beyond my expectations." The old man sighed and said, "This old man only hates that I didn't kill that beast with my palm. My young royal family wouldn't have withered to this extent." Yang Liuking lowered her head and didn't say anything. The old man suddenly looked at her and asked, "Everyone says that Fu Er was assassinated and died. Is this true or false?" Yang Liuking looked at him. After a moment, she shook her head and said, "Yang Fu is still alive." "That's great." The old man called Yang Wanli stood up and said, "I heard that you have the weapons of the Jing Kingdom's army. It is extremely easy to break through the walls and attack the city. Yang Zhe has already betrayed the people. You gather the army and fight all the way from here to the imperial capital. This is not a fantasy. At that time, kill that traitor, restore order and support Fu Er to the throne. Only then can the Wu Kingdom have a way out." Li stopped in his tracks and glanced over. Su walked out of the room with a face full of joy. Seeing Li Yi's expression, he asked, "What's wrong?" Li looked at him and said, "About what I just said to Elder Su, you should reconsider it." Su was puzzled and asked, "Think about what?" Li sighed and said, "Just bury him." Chapter 1101. This old man also did not expect that you would be able to obtain so many divine weapons from the Jing Kingdom. With the help of these things, as long as you have more than 100,000 soldiers, you will be invincible and invincible. No city will be able to stop you. In at most a year you will be able to subdue all of the provinces and counties of the Wu Kingdom, and bring your army to the imperial capital. The old man called Yang Wanli spoke in high spirits as if he had already seen the scene he had described. He was completely unaware that the atmosphere had already quietly changed. Yang Liuking lowered her head with a complicated expression. Li Yi's gaze suddenly became emotionless. Su Tian looked at him and slightly shook his head. Yang Liuking raised her head to look at Li Yi. Her lips moved. Although she did not speak, Li Yi understood her expression, and did not say anything for the time being. Soon after, she turned her head to look at the white-haired old man and said seriously, "Imperial uncle, I want to be the emperor. With the red barbarian cannon, the imperial guards of the imperial capital will not be a match for you." As Yang Wanli's spittle flew, he suddenly stopped. After a moment of shock, he looked at her and asked, "What did you just say?" Yang Liuking met his gaze, her expression still extremely serious. She said word by word, "I said I want to be the emperor myself." Young Wanli frowned and said in a deep voice, "Do you know what you are saying?" Yang Liuqing nodded and said, "I know. I said, after we fight our way to the imperial capital, I want to be the emperor myself." She repeated these words 3 times. Each time her expression became more and more serious, but each time her tone became more and more indifferent. It was as if she was saying something insignificant. She was not discussing it, but announcing it. A bunch of nonsense, a bunch of nonsense. The white-haired old man looked at her. Before he could reprimand her, Su patted his shoulder and said, "Come with me." The white-haired old man glanced at Yang Liuqing and followed Su to the other side. Su stopped and turned his head to look at him. He said, "You better give up on your previous thoughts." Yang Wanli frowned. "Su, what do you mean by this?" "I've seen Yang Fu." Su shook his head and said, "That child is already useless. Rather than letting him become the emperor, it would be better to let the Wu kingdom continue to be in chaos." Yang Wanli glared at him and said, "Speak clearly." Su looked at him and asked, "Do you know why your niece could conquer the entire northwest of the Wu kingdom in such a short time?" "Because they have the Jing kingdom's Tian Fa and the Red Barbarian cannon." "Do you know where these things came from?" Yang Wanli was stunned, then shook his head. "That's Jiang of Silla from the Jing kingdom. He gave me these things." Su pointed at Li Yi and continued, "You may not know who Jiang of Silla is, but it doesn't matter. All you need to know is why he helped your granddaughter." "Why?" "His disciple sprained his ankle." Su looked at him and said, "Because of that idiot grandson of yours. You may not believe it, but because of this simple reason, the world he obtained by killing his brother and father was gone with a bang." After listening to the story, Yang Wanli was stunned. When he came back to his senses, he looked at Su and asked, "Do you think I'm muddle-headed?" Su didn't answer. He looked at him and said for the last time, "The world of the Yang clan can fall into anyone's hands, but it can't fall into the hands of that idiot grandson of yours, and it can't fall into the hands of Yang Fu. Do you understand?" Yang Wanli looked at him for a long time and said in a deep voice, "What if I object?" "I will first cripple your martial arts." Su looked at him and said, "Don't look at me like that. You're no match for me right now. You can't even beat the second young mistress. Even if you're not injured, I can still cripple your martial arts." Yang Wanli didn't doubt his strength. Although he was injured, his eyesight and perception were still there. He didn't want to admit it, but he had to admit that the current Su was very strange, and he couldn't see through him. On the path to becoming a grandmaster, he had at least taken a big step ahead of them. Yang Wanli looked at him calmly. "We've been friends for decades, and you want to cripple my martial arts?" Su shook his head and said, "I'm just advising you. Other than your granddaughter giving up on this herself, no one can stop her. You can't, I can't, and your grandson can't either. I won't do anything to you, but someone will. You can't even beat the second young mistress. What else can you do? Your man is here. Go and ask him yourself." Seeing Prime Minister Wang walk in, Su looked at him and said to him, "I'll give you one last piece of advice. Don't mess with Jiang of Silla. After all, you can't even beat the second young mistress." He turned around and left. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and looked at Prime Minister Wang, saying, "Wait a minute." He walked back and kicked Yang Wanli's butt, sending the latter flying. "This kick is for the palm you just hit her with." His figure flashed and he chased after him. Another voice came from outside the door. "This kick is for making her chase you for 2 months. This kick is for losing a bet with me. This kick is for my own will." Seeing Su walk in, Li Yi asked, "Is it done?" Su nodded and said, "Don't worry. He's not a stubborn person. Otherwise, he would be the martial emperor now." "I'm not asking him." Li Yi shook his head. Did it make any difference whether the old man did it or not? He couldn't even beat Rui. If he didn't listen to him, he could just drag him out and bury him. He looked at Su and said, "I'm talking about the one in the room." Old Su blushed, which was rare. This was the first time that Li Yi had seen admiration on his face. Su nodded and said, "You taught me a good way." Li Yi shook his head. It wasn't that he taught him a good way. It was that the old woman's feelings for him hadn't diminished after decades. Instead, they had become more and more mellow. He didn't believe that he could give a white rabbit creamy candy to a random girl on the street and hold her hand and say sweet words to her. It would be strange if the old hooligan didn't arrest him to take him to the officials. "Uncle." Yang Liuqing walked to his side and said in a low voice. "You are the future empress. You have to show the aura that you used to talk to your uncle just now." Li looked at her and said, "Stick out your chest and raise your head." Bai Su was standing next to Yang Liuqing, shoulder to shoulder. She didn't notice it before, but when she raised her head and raised her chest, the contrast between the two was a little obvious. Bai Su was very sensitive to certain things. She immediately noticed the difference between the two. She glared at Li Yi fiercely and turned away. Li Yi just wanted to cultivate Yang Liuqing's confidence. This time, he really didn't do it on purpose. But then again, Mississippi Lu's apprentice really didn't embarrass her. He didn't want to say that. What he wanted to say was that the current Yang Liuqing had already made him very satisfied. The words she said in front of old man Yang just now were neither servile nor overbearing. She was unquestionable. She already had a little bit of what an empress should have. On one side, Yang Liuqing raised her chest and raised her head. On the other side, Prime Minister Wang was scolded by old man Yang. "What kind of prime minister are you? You actually didn't tell me such a big thing. The former emperor handed King Jing to you. How did you teach him? How did you teach him to be like this? How did you face the former emperor?" After scolding Prime Minister Wang, Yang Wanli finally vented his anger. He strode over, looked at Li Yi and said, "Jiang of Silla, come in with me." "Don't worry." Li Yi faced Yang Liuqing's worried eyes and followed Yang Wanli into a room. "Young Fu can't be the emperor." Without waiting for him to speak, Li Yi went straight to the point. "I'm the one who gave them their weapons. I'm the one who gave them Sky's punishment. I'm also the one who gave them the Red Barbarian Cannon. I'm also the one who came up with their revolutionary plans. Do you think that I did all of this because I have too much money to burn?" Yang Wanli looked at him and said aggressively, "You gave her weapons, Tianfa, and the Red Barbarian Cannon. You helped her make a plan to make her the next emperor of the Wu Kingdom. You must have a motive for everything you do. If you didn't do all of this because you have too much money to burn, then tell me, what are you after?" Li Yi really wanted to tell him that he actually did all of this because he had too much money to burn. Yang Liuqing was Rui's disciple and his martial nephew. Even if he wanted to burn money, burning it on her was obviously better than burning it on someone else. Moreover, this money was just an investment. There would be generous returns in the future. Most importantly, this money also carried a great dream of his. Of course, none of this had anything to do with this old man. He didn't need to explain it to him. Li Yi looked at him and said calmly, "She is my martial nephew. I am willing to help her. You don't have to worry about me. You must have a motive for giving." Yang Wanli looked at him, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. After a moment, he seemed to realize something. He suddenly slammed the table and said angrily, "You beast! She is your martial nephew." Chapter 1102. Although Li Yi wasn't familiar with this old man called Yang Wanli, and it was their first time meeting, he could almost conclude that he was a very selfish person. What you give, you must want. How selfish must a person be to say something so selfish? His mother had raised him up and sacrificed so much. What was he after? Prime Minister Wang was already so old. Yet he gave up the luxurious life in the imperial capital and the high position of Prime Minister, who was below only one person but above tens of thousands of people, and risked his life to follow Yang Liuqing around, wholeheartedly assisting her. What was he after? Mississippi Lu, because of the master-disciple relationship, gathered the masters of the Lu Alliance to help her take down 5 cities. What was she after? This old man wasn't only selfish, but also arrogant. He liked to impose his thoughts on others. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew. He helped his martial nephew take revenge. Help his martial nephew fulfill his wish. Help his martial nephew plan his life. What was going on? What was going on? Yang Wanli looked at him and said in a low voice, "Since ancient times, there has never been a female emperor." "Forget it." Li Yi interrupted him with a wave of his hand. Don't think that you can speak irresponsibly just because you're old. Who says that no woman has ever been an emperor since ancient times? Do you not pay any attention to current affairs other than cultivating? Also, even if there isn't a female emperor, why can't she be the first? Young Wanli was speechless at Li Yi's question. He took a deep breath and said, "What if this old man firmly opposes? Then drag him out and bury him." "You won't do that." "I really won't." Li Yi nodded. No matter what, this old man was one of the few relatives of Yang Liuqing. He couldn't really drag him out and bury him. However, he was quite popular in the Wu Kingdom. If he was determined to go against them, there would be some unnecessary trouble. "I can cripple your martial arts, find a courtyard, and let you live out the rest of your life in peace. What do you think of this suggestion?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Can you beat our second miss? What about after she becomes the emperor?" Yang Wanli took a deep breath and thought. He looked at him and asked, "Who will she pass the empire to?" "That's her business. Didn't Prime Minister Wang tell you just now?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Whether it's passed to her son or daughter, that's your Yang family's business. You can pass it to whoever you want, but it won't be passed to my son. It has nothing to do with me." Li Yi knew what old Yang was worried about. He wasn't worried that Yang Liuqing would become the first emperor in the Wu Kingdom, or even the world. He was worried that Yang Liuqing would interfere with the Wu Kingdom's imperial power. He had experienced this kind of thing once in the Jing Kingdom. If it weren't for the fact that his family had no interest in being the emperor of the Wu Kingdom would have been his child instead of Yang Liuqing's. Old Yang would have been planted in the ground instead of standing here and talking to him. He had explained everything clearly. He glanced at Yang Wanli, turned around, and walked out of the room. Compared with wasting time here, he wanted to see what was going on with Rui. He was a little confused. He hoped that Rui could make a breakthrough, but he didn't want Rui to make a breakthrough. He hoped that she could realize her wish, but he didn't want to live under her shadow for the rest of his life. If she didn't make a breakthrough, he would have a chance to turn things around. If she made a breakthrough, he could only be suppressed by her for the rest of his life. After a while, Rui had already walked out of the room. Li Yi walked over and asked nervously, "How was it? Did you make a breakthrough?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "I just had some enlightenment. It's not so easy to break through to the supreme power realm." Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "You seem to be very happy." Li Yi was startled and said, "I'm happy for you that you have a new understanding. But it's fine if you didn't break through. Elder Su said that you broke through by chance. After a while, let's go out and enjoy the scenery. Maybe when the chance comes you'll naturally break through." Li Yi patted her on the shoulder and said, "Student Rui, keep working hard. I believe that day will come." The appearance of Yang Wanli and Senior Tian was an accident. Under the influence of Su's sloppy charm, the matter was finally settled. Senior Tian leaned against the bed, took Yang Liuqing's hand and said apologetically, "Miss, I'm sorry." Yang Liuqing smiled, indicating that she did not care. Old Yang changed his clothes. He was not liked by the other two Supreme Power Realm Masters, and was discussing something with Prime Minister Wang, Wei Liang, and the others. When he saw Li Yi walk into the room, he hurried over and called Yang Liuqing over, as if he was guarding against a thief. In fact, 3 Supreme Power Realm Masters were enough to sneak into the Imperial Palace of the Wu Kingdom, and use violent means to force the current Emperor Wu to abdicate. However, Senior Tian was seriously injured and her foundation was damaged. She needed a long time to recuperate. Old Su would definitely be by her side, so this plan could not be carried out for the time being. Secondly, Li Yi did not want to do this. Although forcing the Emperor Wu to abdicate could directly achieve their ultimate goal, it would only be a superstructure, and the foundation would not be stable. The Wu Kingdom would still be a chaotic Wu Kingdom, which was not in line with their original intention. The strategy they adopted was to fight and govern, establish a foothold in the northwest, and expand one state and one city after another. Although this would take some time, after she ascended the throne, the internal strife of the Wu Kingdom would also end. With a wave of her hand, it would be a new era of the Empress. She was injured and needs to recuperate. This time, I won't go back with you. Su looked at Senior Tian on the bed, then turned to look at him and said. Li nodded. The Wu Kingdom was basically settled. Suzhou and Rui City had been stable. Su would stay here to take care of Senior Tian and protect Yangliuking at the same time, in case old Yang regretted it. Since he had taken the initiative to suggest it, there was no need for him to say it himself. In fact, they did not have anything important to do next. They would probably go sightseeing, travel around various countries, fulfill Rui's Jianghu dream, and accompany Rui and the others. Of course, in the process, whether it was the Qi Kingdom or the Jing Kingdom, there were still some things that needed to be settled. Of course, these were all things that needed to be planned after they returned to Rui City. Su thought for a while, then looked at him and asked, You are going to the Qi Kingdom, right? Li nodded slightly. It was a must to go to the Qi Kingdom. The business in the Qi Kingdom had been handed over to Miss Lin. Even he himself did not expect that he would be a hands-off boss for 4 years. Every year, the silver shipped from the Qi Kingdom accounted for more than 10% of the total income of the mansion. It seemed to be only 10%, but it was already a very terrifying number. In these 4 years, apart from a regular letter, he had no other contact with Miss Lin. In addition, it was time to settle the grudges with the Taoist nun and the holy religion. Su looked at him and said, If there is any news about the Taoist nun, let me know immediately. Su was a very strange person. He had suffered so much in the past, and the main culprit was obviously second great-uncle, but he could not forget the Taoist nun, thinking day and night of teaching her how to be a good person. This was a typical case of bullying the weak and fearing the strong. What Taoist nun? The old woman leaning against the headboard suddenly asked. A female grandmaster. Li thought for a while, then said, She is old friends with Su. A female grandmaster? Elder Tian's eyes moved. He looked at Su and asked, If there is any news, I will let you know immediately. Do you really want to see her? Yes. Su nodded, then gritted his teeth and said, Even in my dreams. Li sighed, then turned and walked out of the room. As a single dog who had been single all his life, there were some things that he could not teach him if he did not experience them himself. Today's lesson should be able to let him understand a little. When faced with extreme situations, he should erupt with a strong desire to survive, and not a strong desire to die. Chapter 1103. Su seemed to have understood something. When he walked out of the room, his expression was one of astonishment and contemplation. He looked at Li Yi, who was standing in the courtyard, and asked, Why is she angry? Su's question was very good. Why is she angry? Why is she still angry? Why is she angry again? These were 3 world-class philosophical questions, each more difficult than the last. Countless scholars, ancient and modern, Chinese and foreign, had studied these questions, but none of them had come to a conclusion. This was an unsolvable problem. When she was angry, the only way to survive was through a strong desire to live. Li thought for a moment and said, Never tell a woman that you miss another woman in front of her, even if you don't treat her as a woman, or even as a person. Su was confused. But that damn Taoist nun is my enemy. First of all, she is a woman that you dream of. Li looked at him and said, Other than Elder Tian, the only woman you dream of is your mother. But my mother passed away decades ago, so there are no exceptions. Li felt that he had made it clear enough. If Elder Su still did not understand the deeper meaning behind his words, then he was not prepared to teach him anymore. It would be more dignified to talk about a smart, naive, and adorable student like Shou Ning. If he were to talk about a student with such poor comprehension skills, he, the great King Jing, would not be able to bear the embarrassment. Su nodded as if he understood. He asked, Then why didn't you stop me just now? If I had stopped you, you would never have realized this problem. This actually involved a higher level of knowledge that he did not understand at the moment. In the past few years, Li Yi had used his own experience to explain that the desire to live was not innate. It was a precious experience that he had learned through constant courting death, and experiencing many successes and failures. If he was already a king in this aspect, then Elder Su was just a LVL1 rookie. He still had a long way to go in terms of leveling up, and it was bound to be interspersed with countless blood and tears. Su thought for a moment and nodded. He said seriously, "Teach me a little more." In fact, there was no shortcut to this path. Li really didn't know where to start when he asked so bluntly. He thought for a moment and said, "I recommend you a book. You should read it when you have time." The book is called Mandarin Duck Handkerchief. It depicts the psychology of women very deeply and vividly. If you want to conquer women, you must first understand women. He had been a complete stranger to love in the beginning, but in the past few years, he had realized some things through his own experience. The longer time passed, the more he admired the great goddess who wrote the Mandarin Duck Handkerchief. Her knowledge and understanding of the relationship between men and women were so deep that he was convinced. He almost prostrated himself before her. "Mandarin Duck Handkerchief?" Su nodded and asked, "Where can I buy it?" This was the key question. Mandarin Duck Handkerchief could only be found in the Jing Kingdom, and it was also copied among women. It was forbidden to be sold on the market. She only knew Mississippi Lu had it. She would ask for him later. "I'll ask for you later." Li thought of something and asked, "You said that Rui needs a chance to break through to the Supreme Power realm. What is the chance?" He still hoped that Rui could achieve her wish. Even if he would be under her for the rest of his life, he did not care. It did not matter to him whether he was on top or below, as long as she liked it. Su looked out of the courtyard wall and said, "Between life and death, love and hatred." Li looked at him and asked, "Which one do you belong to?" "Back then, I was high-spirited and vigorous. I roamed the Jianghu and helped the weak. I made many enemies. One time, I was chased by my enemies and my life was hanging by a thread. Only then did I comprehend the great path of a grandmaster. One aperture after another, I turned defeat into victory and killed all my enemies with my sword." Su said it casually, but Li heard the thrill in it. People's potential was forced out. Between life and death, one could realize the slim chance of survival and break through the shackles of martial arts. It sounded like it. But how many people in the Wu Kingdom and how many Supreme Power Realm Masters were there? The old lady lying on the bed must belong to the second kind. Young Wanli did not know, but he was the first kind. There were so many people who practiced martial arts in the Wu Kingdom, but there were only 2 people who broke through to the Supreme Power Realm between life and death. What about the others? Those who did not break through were all dead. Li did not want Rui to choose the first way. If something happened to her, who could he find a sister-in-law who could cook so well? He looked at Su and asked, "What does love and hatred mean?" "Separation in life and death, great joy and great sorrow, and great ups and downs." Great joy and sorrow, and great ups and downs belong to emotions. It was not difficult to understand. It was similar to turning sorrow and anger into strength, or suddenly exploding in a small universe. Taoist nun belonged to this kind. Her whole family was slaughtered, so she became a young supreme power. But there was also a risk. If after great joy and sorrow, she did not break through to the supreme power realm, but had a cerebral hemorrhage and epilepsy, it would not be worth it. He frowned slightly and asked, "Is there no other gentler way?" "That depends on your luck." Su shook his head and said, "Young Wanli became a supreme power after a night's sleep. As far as I know, your wife did not spend much effort to become a supreme power. Changde was born with a disability, so he is different from normal people like us. We can't compare him. That ox nose in your Jing Kingdom is famous all the time, but he is only a supreme power." Li looked at him and asked, "After saying so much, if you want to become a supreme power?" Su nodded and said, "It still depends on your luck." After saying so much, they went back to the topic of luck. Li planned to borrow books from Mississippi Lu first. When it came to martial arts, it was better to let nature take its course. Life and death, and great ups and downs, it was better for her to treat him better. She would rub his shoulders and cook his noodles. Maybe she could share some of his transmigrata halo with her. And he would become a supreme power after a night's sleep. Rui never hid her knowledge in martial arts. When Li walked into her room, She was teaching Bai Su and Yang Liuqing. No wonder their martial arts improved so quickly. Rui always gave them special lessons, helping them step by step and teaching them personally. It would be strange if he could leave them behind. He walked to the bedside and said, "Rui, lend me the book under your pillow." Mississippi Lu was busy. She looked up and asked casually, "What book?" "The Mandarin Duck Handkerchief." Li lifted her pillow and said, "The one you made notes on, the one you wrote a lot of thoughts in. Where did it go?" Mississippi Lu stood up abruptly and looked at him with a face full of shame and anger. "You went through my stuff? I accidentally saw it once. What are you so nervous about?" Li glanced at her and said, "It's not me who wants it. It's Su who wants to read it. You can lend it to him. When Elder Tian recovers, he can provide you with another grandmaster to practice with." "I threw it away." Mississippi Lu glared at him, the anger in her eyes still lingering. "Threw it away?" Li shook his head. "It would be a waste to throw it away." She looked at Yang Liuqing and asked, "Do you have this book?" Yang Liuqing's face turned red. She would not lie. It seemed that she did have it. Li was about to ask again, but she lowered her head and said softly, "I left it in Rui City. I didn't bring it." Li looked at Bai Su. Bai Su took out a thin book from her sleeve and threw it to him. She said lightly, "Remember to return it to me after reading it." The white heroine was indeed forthright. Li handed the book to Elder Su and told him to keep it safe. After he finished reading it, he realized a problem. The Mandarin Duck Handkerchief was the ancient version of the 36 stratagems for catching a man. It taught women how to pick up men. Why did Bai Su read this kind of book? Did she also want to understand women's minds? It was unnecessary. If she had the time, she might as well learn how to pick up girls from him. However, the Mandarin Duck Handkerchief could be called the emotional textbook for women in the Jing Kingdom. It was too widely spread. In the past, he only knew that Xiao Huan and Xiao Cui had it. He did not expect that even Rui and Yang Liuqing could not avoid it. Even Bai Su carried one with her. He wondered if Mingzu had it. The strange thing was that Rui, Ruoqing, and Zue Mo had been with him day and night, but he had never seen them read it. During the meal, Li finally asked this question. Rui looked at him, shook her head and said, "I've heard of the Mandarin Duck Handkerchief, but I've never seen it." Ruoqing also shook her head slightly and said, "I've seen it with a sister before. I flipped through a few pages, but then I was delayed by something, so I didn't read it again." "Why do you ask this?" "Nothing. I'm just asking." Li put their favorite dishes in their bowls. Looking at Mississippi Lu and Yang Liuqing opposite him, he thought that nothing could be biased. After all, Rui and Ruoqing were different from single dogs who had no partners. Chapter 1104. After careful calculation, Li and Rui had been in Sangzhou for a long time. They came here 2 months before the Spring Festival, and went back to Rui City for the New Year. Just after the Lantern Festival, they came to Sangzhou again. Previously, he was worried that Yang Liuqing and the others would not be able to carry out all aspects of work smoothly after they took over Sangzhou. After such a long time of learning, she had a clear understanding of the revolutionary routine. Since she could be a good leader, Li had nothing to worry about. With old Yang and Su watching over her, Li no longer had any concerns about her safety. After staying in Sangzhou for a few more days, it was the day of departure that Li and Rui had discussed. Zue Mo and Li Mu were still waiting for them in Rui City, so it was not good for them to stay in Sangzhou for a long time. Moreover, the Wu Kingdom's worries were gone, and there would not be any problems in the following development. Li had no reason to stay here. "Senior sister, goodbye." Li Duan sat in the carriage, lifted the curtain, and waved at Yang Liuqing vigorously. Yang Liuqing was his senior sister in name, but in fact, she was half his master. Rui only spanked him when he was disobedient, and the usual teaching was done by Yang Liuqing. Rui and Ruoqing got on the carriage and Mississippi Lu, Bai Su and Yang Liuqing talked. Bai Su was not the #1 master under Mississippi Lu, but she did grow the fastest. Whether it was martial arts or broad-mindedness, she was deeply trusted by Mississippi Lu. It was not too much to call Bai Su her right-hand man. Senior Tian still needed a long time to recuperate, but small-scale activities were not a problem. She stood with Su and saw them off. "I'll look for you after she recovers." Su took a few steps forward and said. Then he lowered his voice so that only he and Li Yi could hear and whispered, "If there's any news about Taoist Nun, send me a letter immediately." Actually, he did not have to speak so softly. Senior Tian's body had not yet recovered, so he could not hear what he said. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Before I leave, I want to teach you one last principle." Su nodded and pretended to listen attentively. Whatever Li Yi taught him, he followed it as a philosophy of life. Never trust others unconditionally. A smile appeared on Li Yi's face as he said, "Except for yourself." A puzzled look appeared on Su's face. "What do you mean?" Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't worry. If there's any news about Taoist Nun, I'll send you a letter immediately." Li Yi did not deliberately lower his voice, so it was clear. When he felt a sharp gaze behind him, which made his back feel a little cold, Su finally understood what Li Yi wanted to teach him. He narrowed his eyes and gritted his teeth. "I'll remember it." When Li Yi turned around and was about to leave, he clearly saw that the old man named Yang Wanli let out a sigh of relief. He wanted to tell him that he was thinking too much and that he had no interest in the Yang family's Wu kingdom at all. But after thinking about it, he gave up. He liked to guess, so let him keep guessing. He waved to the crowd, and when he turned around again, a voice came from behind him. "Uncle." He turned around and saw Yang Liuqing coming over. Yang Liuqing walked to Li Yi's side, looked at him and asked, "Uncle, I don't know when we can meet again after this farewell. Can I hug you?" Not far behind her, Yang Wanli's body stiffened and his face changed greatly. Li Yi was also taken aback. Then he smiled and opened his arms. Yang Luqing paused for a moment, then took a step forward and gave him a light hug. They separated as soon as they touched. A smile bloomed on her face as she waved her hand. "Martial aunt, goodbye?" "Goodbye." Li Yi waved and got on the carriage. Bai Su walked out from behind Yang Liuqing and looked at her with a hint of teasing on her face. She said, "Our otherworldly empress, which man do you want to deal with that Mandarin duck handkerchief?" She whispered in her ear and walked to the carriage with her hands behind her back. Then she turned around and waved. "Let's go." The group of carriages moved further and further away. Yang Wanli's face was as black as charcoal. "Su Tian, come in with me." Senior Tian looked at Su Tian, then turned around and walked back to his room. "Little brat." Su sighed softly and followed in with his head lowered. Yang Liuqing watched the carriages go away. After a long time, she let out a sigh of relief. When she turned around, her aura was completely different. She looked at Wei Liang and Chen Qing standing behind her and said, "Send a letter to the provincial governors of Su Prefecture and Chen Prefecture. I will only give them 3 days to consider. If they don't surrender in 3 days, they won't have the chance to surrender anymore." Wei Liang knelt on one knee and cupped his fists. Understood. It had been a few days since Li Yi returned to Rui City. Rui Zui Mo, and even his godmother felt that Sangzhou was a place of slaughter. Countless souls had died on the battlefield, so they didn't want Li Mu and Yong Ning to stay there for long. After not seeing him for a few months, little Li Mu really missed him. She even wanted to sleep with him. It was said that daughters and fathers were close, and this was true. This matter made Zui Mo very jealous. After all, she was the one who gave birth to Li Mu and had always been by her side. Seeing how close she was to Li Yi, she could only call her little heartless. Li Mu, who was about to be 1 year old, could already say words like father and mother. Under Zui Mo's guidance, she could also say some other words. The rest of the credit belonged to Yong Ning, who watched her and talked to her all day. At 11 years old, Yong Ning no longer looked like the little girl with dementia 5 or 6 years ago. When Li Yi first saw Shaning, she was probably her age. She was his aunt and also the king of the children in the family. The person Li Duan admired the most was her because her martial arts were better than Li Duan's, and she would play with him. There were no peers around him, and the one who was the youngest than him was his aunt. Li Duan was talking to Li Mu at the side. "Xiao Mu, When you are a little older, brother can play with you. You have to grow up quickly. When you grow up, Xiaonyang will come to see you. Li Mu giggled. Xiaonyang. Li sat in the yard, drinking the grape wine that Xiaozhu had made for a long time. Unfortunately, there was no one to drink with him. Fong could barely be considered half a companion, but he was busy with other things these days. He was about to go on a long journey, and he didn't know how long he would be gone this time. Naturally, there were a lot of things to prepare. Rui was also very busy recently. Before she left, she needed to pick some people to go with her, and the matters in the league had to be arranged properly. Bai Su also liked to drink, and as her chest became more and more erect, her attitude towards him became better and better. Unfortunately, she followed behind Mississippi Lu all day long, and Li really couldn't find anyone for a while. He sighed and raised the wine cup. Halfway through, he suddenly put it down and lightly slapped his palm behind him. The two palms collided, and Li felt as if his palm had fallen into a ball of cotton, unable to advance or retreat. In just an instant, he understood two things. First, the other party had no ill intentions. Second, the other party's strength was far superior to his, and it could even be said to be heaven and earth apart. A sinister voice came from behind him. Not bad, I haven't seen you for a few years, and you haven't slacked off in martial arts. The voice was very familiar, but he hadn't heard it for a few years. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and the next moment, a smile appeared on his face. He looked at Fong, who had just walked into the yard, and laughed loudly. Bring the wine, the strongest kind. Chapter 1105. Chang was a man who always spoke in a gloomy way and had a deadpan face, which made him very unpopular. His name was enough to make countless officials and nobles in the capital tremble with fear. Ordinary people might not have heard of Manager Chang, but in the rich and powerful families, his name could stop children from crying at night. Li Yi had never felt so close to this deadpan face as he did now. Fong brought the strongest wine in the mansion. It was not the kind of wine that was distilled by industrial distillation. It was the first batch of wine officially brewed after the improvement of the process. I've been to a lot of places and drunk a lot of wine in the past few years. Your wine is the best to my taste. No wonder His Majesty couldn't forget it. Chang didn't drink like Fong and the others, who drank with their heads raised. After drinking, a small part of the wine was spilled on his neck and body. He drank cup by cup, and sometimes he savored it carefully. He didn't waste a drop. He had followed the former emperor for most of his life, so he always talked about him. After drinking a few cups, Li Yi slowed down and asked, "Where have you been these years?" Chang refilled his cup and said, "Everywhere north and south of the Yangtze River. His Majesty had a wish when he was alive. He wanted to go to every state and every county in the Jing Kingdom. His Majesty is gone, so only I can fulfill his wish." The former emperor once said that he wanted to go to every state and every county in the Jing Kingdom, so Chang's footprints had been to every state and every county in the Jing Kingdom. With such a loyal servant, the former emperor's spirit in heaven should be very happy. Li Yi took a sip of wine and asked, "What's your plan next?" "The world is so big, but this is the only place that is interesting. I plan to stay here and teach a few disciples. I'll enjoy a few years of peace and happiness. What do you think, Your Highness King Jing?" What was there to think about? Li Yi agreed with both hands and feet. Chang was a guru and one of the best among the gurus. He was as rare as the feathers of a phoenix or the horns of a qilin. Compared to a guru, the national first-class protected animals paled in comparison. Once old Tian recovered from his injuries, and with the addition of Su, Li Yi counted with his fingers, it would be incredible. If he could also capture old Taoist Yuan, their family would have the 5 unparalleled masters. This was not even considering second great-uncle or Rui, who was half a step into grandmaster. In the future, we can turn Rui City into a retirement home for the grandmasters. High benefits and pensions will provide a strong guarantee for these lonely old heroes in their later years. We welcome all the grandmasters to settle down here. Grandpa Chang. Yongning ran over from afar with a smile on her face. Her voice was crisp and filled with joy. "Your Highness Yongning." Changde looked at her, and revealed a rare smile. Your Highness has grown so tall in just a few years. Li Duan followed behind Yongning. He had seen Chang when he was young. However, he was too young at that time and probably did not have much of a memory of him now. He looked at him curiously. This is your duenna, isn't it? Changde grabbed his arm and squeezed it. He nodded and said, his foundation is not bad. He's a good seedling for martial arts. He extended his hand and searched Li Duan's body from head to toe. When his hand reached his crotch, Li Duan finally could not help but run away. He hid behind Yongning and looked at Changde with fear in his eyes. Not bad, not bad. Chang repeated the word not bad a few times. This was extremely rare. Dragons would give birth to dragons and phoenixes would give birth to phoenixes. Rui had broken through to Grandmaster at a young age. Naturally, her son would not be bad either. Su had also said that his son's foundation was very good and much better than his father's. During this period, under the awe of Mississippi Lu, he had been exceptionally diligent in his cultivation. Rui and Su would often give him pointers. There was no shortage of grandmasters around him. His future achievements would not be too low. Chang looked at him and said, I have never accepted a disciple in my life. I don't want my martial arts to be lost. Your son has a good aptitude. It won't be a disgrace to my name if I accept him as my disciple. What do you think? It was naturally good to have a grandmaster as a disciple. However, Su had also expressed the intention to accept Li Duan as a disciple when he was a little older. Li hesitated for a moment and asked, Master, I don't need to purify my body, right? Li Duan tugged at Yongning's sleeve curiously and asked, Little aunt, what is purifying my body? Yongning shook her head and said, I don't know either. Li Yi carried Li Duan over and whispered something in his ear. Li Duan's eyes widened. He jumped down from his legs and ran outside quickly. He was a man. Only those with a small penis were men. He did not want to cut it off. Even if this old man was very powerful, even if he was more powerful than his aunt, he would not cut it off. Li Yi watched him run out and said, Su has the same idea. Let's wait for Li Duan to grow up a little. That Su guy? Chang frowned and said, That Su guy's martial arts are lousy. How can he be compared to me? Li Yi knew about the grudge between Su and Chang. A few years ago, he had personally witnessed the battle that involved a man's pride. That battle ended in a draw. Since then, Su had been looking for trouble at second great-uncle's place every day. He was no longer the Su Tian from 3 years ago. Chang had been touring the world these few years. He did not know if he had achieved a breakthrough. He did not have the heart to tell Chang that Su was different from him now. He was old and had a sunset glow. When Elder Tian recovered, the two grandmasters would join forces and teach him a lesson in a matter of minutes. If old Yang's love-hate gay friend was added to the equation, Chang's chances of winning were close to zero. Changde looked at Yongning, who was chasing after Li Duan, and nodded. He said, You have taken good care of Her Highness Yongning these few years. You did not let His Majesty down. Li cupped his hands. It's my duty. But what about Her Highness Emingzu and Shaning? Changde changed the topic. He furrowed his brows and asked, You left them in the capital for many years while you enjoyed yourself here. What did you promise His Majesty back then? Li opened his mouth. This was a question that could not be answered in a few words. He paused, then said, That's why I said that Li Xian is really not a good person. The previous emperor passed the throne to him, but he left everything to Emingzu. Is there any emperor like this? You were the one who promised the previous emperor. Come, let's drink. Don't change the topic. Let's get drunk. It had been a long time since Li Yi had gotten drunk. Under Chang's questioning, he held the jar of wine and gulped down a few mouthfuls. He immediately became drunk. My head is so dizzy. He shook his head and stood up. He waved his hand toward the other side of the courtyard and said, Xiao Huan, help me to rest. The servant girl quickly ran over and put Li Yi's arm on her shoulder. She helped him walk into the room. Li Yi was really drunk. He took off his shoes, laid on the bed with his clothes on, and quickly fell asleep. Xiao Huan fetched some hot water, wetted the cloth, and wrung it dry. She carefully wiped his face and palm. She had done this action countless times and could control her strength very well. Even in his sleep, a comfortable expression appeared on Li Yi's face. After she finished wiping Li Yi's face and palm, she put the cloth back into the basin, covered him with the blanket, and quietly left. When she reached the door, she turned her head back and looked at the figure lying on the bed. Her gaze was somewhat confused and dim after a long time. She turned and left, leaving behind only a faint sigh. Chapter 1106. The difference between a good wine and a bad wine was the taste and the headache after a hangover. The wine he drank with Chang yesterday was his treasure. He didn't even want to let Xiaozhu experiment with it. When he woke up in the morning, he only had a slight headache. Xiao Huan wet the towel and walked over to help him wipe his face. Li Yi took the towel from her hand and said, "I'll do it myself." He wiped his face. Xiao Huan took the towel from his hand and put it back in the basin. She turned and walked out. When he put on his clothes and got out of bed, he felt that something was wrong. It wasn't the first time he had this feeling. Ever since he came back from Sangzhou, he felt that something was different. But when he thought about it carefully, he couldn't remember what it was. He sat at the table and frowned. This feeling made him very uncomfortable. He woke up late this morning. Rui and the others had already finished breakfast. Xiao Huan brought the heated food in, put it on the table and walked out. Li Yi picked up the chopsticks. Halfway through, his expression froze. He knew where the difference came from. Quiet, too quiet. In the past, when he woke up, Xiao Huan would stand by the bed and hand him a towel. When he wiped his face, she would tell him about the new things that happened between the maids in the fu. When he ate, Xiao Huan would sit beside him or across from him. She would hold her chin with one hand or both hands and watch him eat in a daze. When he found out, she would smile foolishly and her eyes curved into crescent moons. When he was writing in the study, she stood by the side to grind the ink. After she was done, she walked behind him, put her hands behind her back, and tiptoed to see what he was writing. Even though she didn't recognize many of the words, not anymore. She would still hand him a hot towel in the morning, but she wouldn't sit across from him when he ate. When he was in the study, she would grind the ink and leave by herself for fear of disturbing him. Several times, Li Yi saw her sitting alone in the courtyard in a daze. Xiao Huan used to be in a daze, but it was rare for her to be in a daze for several hours like recently. Li Yi felt a little guilty. Ever since he arrived in Xuzhou 3 years ago, he had been tossing and turning in the chaotic land and the Wu Kingdom. He rarely had any free time. She loved to listen to him tell stories. How long had it been since he last sat in the courtyard and let her massage his shoulders while he told her a story? It was so long ago that he could no longer remember it clearly. Xiao Huan's significance to him was irreplaceable. Xiao Chui could not. Xiaozhu could not. Even Rui and Rui could not. When he first came to this world, when he was at his most hesitant and helpless, the one who was always by his side was actually not Rui, nor was it Rui. The Xiao Huan at that time was still a silly and adorable little maid, only knew how to circle around him, liked to listen to his stories, liked to eat the food he cooked. She was always chattering and seemed to have endless things to say. When did she become so reticent? Rui walked in from outside and sat beside him. She said softly, "Hubby." Li Yi raised his head. She looked over and asked, "Hubby, do you know what day it is tomorrow?" March 21st. March 21st was not his and Rui's wedding anniversary, nor was it Rui's birthday, nor was it Rui's birthday. March 21st was Xiao Huan's birthday. Li Yi's face was full of regret. If it wasn't for Rui's reminder, he actually forgot about Xiao Huan's birthday. Rui saw the expression on his face and knew that he had remembered. She looked at him and said softly, "After this birthday, Xiao Huan will be 20 years old." Li Yi sighed softly. "Little maid has grown up." Xiao Huan is concubine's Tong Fong maid. Concubine knows hubby felt that Xiao Huan was too young, but after today, she will be 20 years old. If a Tong Fong maid is not a Tong Fong maid, she will be an ordinary maid. Others might not dare to say it openly, but what would they think of her? Rui looked at him, shook her head and said, "These things Xiao Huan will not tell hubby. Hubby yourself will not think of it." Li Yi's eyes were slightly dazed. In his memory, The little maid was always that little maid with 2 buns or a bun on her head, swaying around in front of him. He did not realize that Li Duan was already 4 years old. Yongning had already grown into a young lady. In a few more months, even if it was measured by the future generation's standards, Shaning would be considered an adult. Little maid actually was not a little maid for a long time. Xiao Chui had just coaxed Li Mu to sleep and walked back to the courtyard that belonged to her, Xiao Zhu and Xiao Huan. Xiao Zhu was packing things in the room. She walked in to take a look and came out again. She asked Xiao Huan, who was sitting in the courtyard in confusion. Xiao Huan, we will be leaving in a few days. Why haven't you packed yet? What are you doing here, eating melon seeds? Young master likes to eat, but he doesn't like to eat. I am peeling some for young master. Xiao Huan turned around and smiled. You guys pack first. I have nothing to pack. I will be done an hour before we leave. Xiao Chui looked at the bowl of melon seeds in front of her and her scratched fingers. She grabbed Xiao Chui's hand and said angrily, Are you stupid? Your hand is already like this. Why are you still peeling? Xiao Huan pulled her hand back, her eyes curved, smiled and said, It's okay, you. Although Xiao Huan was usually so gentle, but when it came to things, Xiao Chui could never be stubborn. She went back to the room angrily, looked outside and said discontentedly, You say, why is this girl so stubborn? Xiao Zhu came over, sighed and said, She is stubborn for a long time. Instead of worrying about Xiao Huan, it is better to worry about ourselves. Xiao Huan is much luckier than us. Did you guys hear Prince and Princess are going out again? I heard from Sister Xiao Zhu and Sister Xiao Chui. This time they will be out for a long time. I really envy Sister Xiao Zhu and Sister Xiao Chui. They follow second madam and third madam. They bring them everywhere. They are the servant girls of second madam and third madam. They will serve them in bed in the future. They are not the same as us. That is not necessarily true. Look at Sister Xiao Huan. She is the princess's servant girl. She has been with Prince for a long time. She has not been taken in as a concubine yet. You guys guess, could it be that Prince does not like her? I think it is possible. Xiao Huan is not like Sister Xiao Zhu and Sister Xiao Chui. She looks silly. How could Prince like her? Olive. You shut up. There was Jiang of Silla in the capital, Jiang of Silla in Rui City, and Jiang of Silla in Shu province. When he left the capital, he left some servant girls to look after the house, took some with him, and left some in Shu province. In Rui City, the servant girls in the house, only a few had been by his side since he was in the capital. The rest were new recruits. The one who spoke harshly at this time was a servant girl called Xiaoqing. When she was in the capital, she worked in the prince's house, and in this Rui City, she was also the head servant of the house, a small housekeeper. Among the servant girls, her position was only below that of Xiao Huan and the other two. At this moment, her face was full of anger. Looking at the two chatting servant girls, she said angrily, What have I usually taught you? Is this something you can say? Perhaps it was because Xiaoqing's usual amiable image had been deeply ingrained in people's hearts. One of the servant girls pouted and said, Sister Xiaoqing, we are not wrong. That's right, that Xiao Huan looks silly. The other person also chimed in. You. Xiaoqing raised her eyebrows and was about to reprimand, but suddenly looked behind the crowd, bowed and said, Prince. Li looked indifferently at the two servant girls in the crowd, waved his hand and said, Pack your things today, go back to where you came from. The two of them paled and knelt on the ground with a thud. Prince, Li waved his hand. Let's go before I change my mind. Hearing this, the two of them trembled and broke out in a cold sweat, immediately got up and left in a hurry. The other servant girls' faces were also slightly pale. They knew that when Prince said that he did not change his mind, he did not mean that he would forgive them. Criticizing behind their backs was a big taboo for them as servants. In those big clans, it was a taboo. No one expected that Prince, who was usually amiable and did not speak harshly to anyone, would be so angry just because they said a few bad words about Miss Xiao Huan. Li glanced at the maidservants. Although his gaze was gentle, everyone shuddered when they thought of the two sentences he had said in such a calm manner. Third year of Jingping, 21st of March. This was a very ordinary day. Li sat in the study, looking at a map of the Qi kingdom. Xiao Huan pushed the door open and came in, placed a small bag on the table, and said softly, "Young master, I peeled some melon seeds. There is no skin, you should eat it soon. It will not taste good after a long time." "Okay." Li nodded. "Young master, remember to eat, I will go down first." Xiao Huan smiled sweetly, turned around, a trace of undetectable disappointment appearing on her face. This trace of disappointment quickly turned into a smile. She sniffed and walked out of the study. She only took one step, and then she could not take another step, because Li grabbed her hand. Chapter 1107. Son-in-law. Her small hand was held tightly by a big hand. Xiao Huan's body trembled. She turned around and looked at him in a daze. In the past at Willow Leaf Village, when they went up the mountain to pick wild vegetables, hunt rabbits, catch pheasants, when she could not walk down the mountain, son-in-law would carry her on his back. When she fell asleep listening to stories, son-in-law would carry her back to their room to sleep. Son-in-law had not held her hand for a very, very long time. Li looked at her hand. The originally slender and white fingers had many scratches. The smooth nails also had many small nicks from wear and tear. Li used both hands to hold her hand, softly said, "Why are you so silly?" Her eyes curved again. 2 dimples appeared at the corner of her mouth, softly said, "Son-in-law, Xiao Huan is not silly, Xiao Huan is willing." Li pulled her over, let her sit on his lap, embraced her, softly said, "It is all son-in-law's fault." A little panic appeared on Xiao Huan's face, quickly said, "Son-in-law treats Xiao Huan the best." Even Li himself felt that he was not a good person. He had neglected her during this period of time. She was still defending him at this time, and even said that she was not silly. Li scratched her nose, said, "Let's go, son-in-law will cook longevity noodles for you." A bright light suddenly flashed in Xiao Huan's bright big eyes. Then her nose turned sour. "Son-in-law still remembers. Let's go." Li held her hand, walked towards the small kitchen. A very, very long time ago, the family of 4 in Willow Leaf Village, when he was not the county lieutenant, not the county marquis, not the golden Ziguang Lu Dafu, and not the Jiang of Silla, the things he had to do every day was nothing more than teaching, cooking, teasing the little servant girls. At that time he was not that familiar with Rui, nor was he that familiar with Rui. The only person he could talk to every day was Xiao Huan. She would be with the group of naughty children, and listen to his story of the 3 dozen white-bone spirits. After school, she would help him wash and cut vegetables. Even if she could not do anything, she would wander around and listen to his stories of strange things. The cooking method of longevity noodles was very simple. There were noodles, vegetables, and eggs. What Xiao Huan could do was to light the fire. Her favorite thing to do was to light the fire. She sat by the stove and poked her head out to take a look. She said, "Young master, 1 egg is enough. I can't eat 2. There's no reason to put only 1 egg in the longevity noodles. You have to put 2, not 1 more, not 1 less." Li didn't look back and continued to work. A look of interest appeared on the maid's pretty face as she asked, "Son-in-law, why is that?" Li explained, "There's a reason for this. 2 eggs means good things come in pairs." A look of worship appeared in the maidservant's eyes again. Son-in-law really knows a lot. Xiao Huan's daily worship of him should have started from the time in Willow Leaf Village. The strange things she heard from him every day had slowly accumulated. Time seemed to have turned back to 6 or 7 years ago. That was a kitchen that was even smaller and more dilapidated than this one. When Li recalled it now, the hesitation and confusion he felt when he first came to this world was probably in that small place. In the chatter and surprise of the maidservant, it slowly disappeared. Today's moonlight was still considered bright. There were many lanterns hanging in the courtyard, so it didn't seem very dark. Li and Xiao Huan sat in the courtyard. In front of her, there was a small bowl of longevity noodles that was still steaming. Xiao Huan picked up the chopsticks, thought for a moment and put them down. She quickly ran into the kitchen and brought another bowl. Seeing that she was about to divide the noodles in the bowl, Li hurriedly stopped her. Longevity noodles cannot be divided. If it is divided, it won't have longevity. Xiao Huan shook her head and said, "There's no meaning in Xiao Huan having longevity alone. Xiao Huan wants to have longevity together with son-in-law. On certain matters, if Xiao Huan was stubborn, even Li Yi couldn't persuade her. He no longer insisted. Xiao Huan divided half of the noodles and gave him a poached egg. A bowl of noodles was not much to begin with. To Li Yi, it was only a matter of 2 or 3 mouthfuls. But she ate very slowly. Every mouthful was chewed carefully. A smile appeared on Li Yi's face. He asked, "How's the taste?" She nodded and said, "As long as it's son-in-law's cooking, it's delicious." Only Xiao Huan thought so. What kind of flour could he cook with a bowl of ordinary longevity noodles? Perhaps it was even slightly inferior to the current Rui. Pa. Li Yi watched her eating the noodles. In the dark night, a streak of fire suddenly streaked across the night sky and then exploded. Fireworks and silver flowers turned into the stars in the sky. Xiao Huan was startled. She put down the bowl and turned her head. After a moment of daze, she pointed to the distant sky and said happily, son-in-law, son-in-law, look, someone is setting off fireworks." Xiao Huan was very happy. Rui was in the mountains. Because of fear of mountain fires, fireworks were forbidden even during the New Year. This was the first time she saw fireworks here. Following the first explosion, streaks of fire shot into the sky and lit up the entire Rui as if it was daytime. Setting off fireworks in the mountains had a certain safety hazard. For this fireworks display, Li Yi specially cleared a square. In these few years, the Jing Kingdom's research on gunpowder had made great progress. Fireworks and firecrackers were also used in many different ways. From Li Yi's point of view, as the flames flickered, the little servant girl was in the depths of the smoke. The flickering smoke made her pretty face look even more delicate and beautiful. This was the first time fireworks were set off on a large scale in Rui City. Countless people walked out of their homes and went to their courtyards and streets to look at the night sky in the distance. After a brief daze, they began to cheer and shout. The entire Rui City was in an uproar at this moment. The fireworks lasted for a full quarter of an hour before gradually dying out. In the night sky, only the 4 words happiness, longevity, health and peace were left, lingering for a long time. Xiao Huan looked at the 4 words. After a long time, she came back to her senses. Looking at Li Yi, her eyes were moist and her lips parted. Son-in-law. Li Yi walked over and helped her wipe the tears off her face. He smiled and said, "Don't cry, everyone is waiting for you." Everyone. Rui and Rui walked in from outside the courtyard. Rui hugged her and patted her head. "Our Xiao Huan has grown up." Mississippi Lu gave her a sword. It was custom-made for her and had her name on it. Everyone in the Li family practiced martial arts. Xiao Huan was no exception. With so many experts teaching her, she might look weak, but she could beat Li Xian's lousy martial arts. Xiao Cui and Xiao Zhu also sent gifts. The 3 of them were as close as sisters. Naturally, they couldn't be left out. Even Li Duan had a gift. It was a small person that he had carved with a knife. Although it couldn't be seen that it was a small person, it was still a token of his heart. The people in and out of Rui City might not know whose birthday was on the 21st of March, but they would always remember this day. Because every year on the 21st of March, there would be a grand fireworks display in Rui City. Imperceptibly, it had become a tradition in Rui City. That night, they played very late in the room. When Xiao Zhu and Xiao Cui left, Xiao Huan had already fallen asleep on the table. Li Yi walked into the room and gently carried her. When he walked to the bedside, before he put her down, he saw the little servant girl's eyelashes tremble slightly. Li Yi didn't put her down. He sat on the bedside with her in his arms. He lowered his head to look at her. After a long time, he moved closer to her ear and whispered, "If you don't wake up, I'm going to leave." Xiao Huan's eyes opened immediately. Her face was red. She whispered, "Son-in-law." Li Yi hugged her tightly. Xiao Huan said in an even lower voice, "Son-in-law, can you stay a little longer?" Li Yi kissed her forehead gently. He whispered, "I won't leave today." He felt the body in his arms tremble. Xiao Huan raised her head to look at him. Her eyes quickly filled with tears. She hugged Li Yi tightly and leaned her head on his shoulder. She sobbed, "Son-in-law Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan has waited for you for a long time." Chapter 1108. Did you see it last night? That firework was so beautiful. What firework? I went to bed early last night. I don't know. That's a pity. The firework last night lasted for more than a quarter of an hour. There were even words in the sky at the end. Anyway, I've never seen such fireworks in my life. Wait. Who dares to set off fireworks in the city? Aren't they afraid of being locked up in a small dark room? Who dares to lock the prince in a small dark room? I heard that those words were something like fou shou. I don't know whose birthday it was yesterday. It's too extravagant. Early in the morning in the city of Rui, people were talking nonstop. Most of the topics were about the fireworks show last night. In the small courtyard, Xiaozhu finished washing up. When she was about to pour water, she looked at Xiao Cui, who was brushing her teeth with green salt. She wondered, strange, why is Xiao Huan not up today? Isn't she usually the most diligent? Xiao Cui said vaguely while brushing her teeth. I don't know. Maybe she was too tired last night. This silly girl. She thought that young master had forgotten about her. Xiaozhu shook her head. Her face was filled with envy. She said, the fireworks last night were so beautiful. Creak. Behind the two of them, a door opened and Xiao Huan walked out. Hey Xiao Huan, you clang. Xiaozhu didn't have time to pour away the washing water. The basin and water fell to the ground, making a clear sound. Her feet were wet but she was oblivious, her eyes staring at Xiao Huan, or more accurately, staring at her hair that was coiled up high. Xiao Cui also stared at her in a daze. The toothbrush in her hand had already fallen to the ground. Her arms were still moving back and forth. There was a kind of sadness in this world. It was called, when you still had two buns, your sisters who were younger than you already had their hair coiled up. They had been left far behind by their peers and then mercilessly abandoned. They suddenly felt a little sad. Xiaozhu picked up the copper basin. Xiao Cui picked up the toothbrush and silently walked back to the room. Xiao Huan looked at them, blushing. She whispered, You. Fourth madam, let us be quiet. The two turned around and said in unison. Li Duan, who was only 4 years old, still didn't understand some things. For example, he couldn't understand why he had to call Aunt Zumo and Ruoqing Aunt at first, but later on, he had to call them mother. He also couldn't understand why Aunt Ruoqing had to call them mother in the future. If he didn't understand, he would ask. That was why he came to ask Li Yi. This. Li Yi thought for a moment, patted his head, and said, Children should be obedient. Don't ask so many questions. A child's curiosity was very strong. Li Yi's answer obviously did not satisfy Li Duan. He thought for a moment, and his eyes turned. Suddenly he said, Father, I know. Is it true that we call them auntie first, then mother? Li Yi nodded. Li Duan would understand these things in the future. As long as he answered him perfunctorily now, it would be fine if he didn't run over and ask questions. Then when should I call auntie mother? Li Duan's face revealed a look of anticipation. He asked, If auntie becomes mother, will she still spank me? If auntie became mother, would she still spank him? Even Li Yi himself didn't have that confidence. Li Yi looked at him and said seriously, You can't call her that. If you do, auntie will spank you until your butt blossoms. Li Duan didn't dare to ask anymore. He ran out of the courtyard, planning to ask auntie. Auntie treated him the best. She wouldn't lie to him, and she even brought him out to play and gave him delicious food. Other than his parents, grandmother, and Xiaonyang, auntie was the person who treated him the best. He ran into a small courtyard and saw a white-haired old man standing in the courtyard. His expression changed and he ran out quickly. He was only halfway when he was picked up. Changde looked at him and said with a smile, Little guy, your father couldn't escape from me back then. Be a good boy and learn from me. My kung fu is much better than that Su guy. Li Duan kept struggling in the air and shouted, I won't cut it, I won't cut it, I won't learn your kung fu. Chang insisted on taking Li Duan as his disciple, and Li Yi didn't stop him. It was his good fortune to have a grandmaster willing to pass on his lifelong knowledge to him. Anyway, Chang didn't understand the Bixia swordplay and the sunflower manual. Li Duan was the young master of the Li family, and he would have to bear many responsibilities in the future. Before that, he must first have a strong body. Xiao Huan, who had already tied up her hair, was teasing Li Mu. Compared to yesterday, although her identity and status had changed, but why did it look like it was just a change of hairstyle? She didn't let Li Yi arrange a maid for her, and still helped him wash and live every day. Although the chatterbox Xiao Huan of the past had disappeared from his memory forever, there was always a smile on her face, and she didn't stare blankly for a whole day like before. The little maid had grown up, and some memories were probably completely sealed in his mind. People had to grow up. This was inevitable. These years he had seen Xiao Huan, Shaning, Yongning, Li Duan, and even Rui grow up. Even Li Yi himself, whether in appearance or mentality, had changed a lot. Many things had changed. The simple and honest Feng Laosen had left, and Rui hadn't changed in these years. Drunk Mo and Ruoqing had come to his side, and even the otherworldly Mississippi Lu had learned to cook. Of course, there were some things that didn't change. For second granduncle, these years were just like changing a rocking chair and sleeping a few times. As for where he slept, whether it was in Qing'an Prefecture or the capital, Suzhou or Rui, it made no difference to him. There were still many things that didn't change. Li Xian was still so stupid and heartless. Mingzhu's heart was still biased towards the people of the Jing kingdom and the world. He still couldn't beat Rui, and couldn't get back his dignity as a man. He had made many friends and also many enemies. The people he cared about, some were right in front of him, and some were far away. In retrospect, it had only been a few years. Li Duan ran over from afar excitedly and said, "Dad, I want to be Grandpa Chang's disciple. Grandpa Chang is more powerful than Auntie. I want to learn martial arts from him, and I will be more powerful than Auntie in the future." Li Duan was still too young. There was a truth that he would only understand when he grew up. Having a woman was not only his father's destiny, but also his destiny. If his life could be divided into 4 seasons, then before he could remember, it had always been spring. After he could remember, or more accurately, after he knew the meaning of the word auntie, his life had passed through summer and autumn, and turned to winter. Li Yi couldn't bear to hurt a 4-year-old child. He hadn't experienced Rui's power. In another 2 years, even his master wouldn't dare to say that he was more powerful than Rui. Otherwise, Chang wouldn't have blushed. He should have blushed for deceiving a 4-year-old child at his age. Feng strode in from outside and said, "Young master, everything is ready. When should we leave?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Early April then." The world was big, and life was not limited to Feng and Changda. There were also Wanru and the Taoist nun in the Qi kingdom, Shaning and Emingzu in the capital. Chapter 1109. A long time ago, Li Yi had been planning a long journey. Since the early years of Jinghe, for a long period of time, their family of 4 had been focused on survival. At that time, he had introduced candied hawthorns, strong liquor, and Rui Du only because he wanted his family to have enough to eat, live in a big house, and not have to worry about their livelihood. Later, when he came to the capital, whether it was to promote various reforms in the Jing kingdom or to help Emingzi build momentum, they were all half-heartedly welcomed. In fact, it had nothing to do with him. Not long ago, he helped Yang Liuqing to rebel. Although there was a small, almost negligible, subjective factor in it, it was not closely related to him. Li Yi felt that he was not even as good as Feng. In the summer of the early years of Jinghe, Feng once told him that his dream was to have a beautiful wife and a big house. A long time ago, his dream came true. Although his wife was not beautiful enough, and his concubines were not beautiful enough, the house was big enough, and he had achieved his life goal. What about himself? Thinking about it carefully, Li Yi did not know what his dream was from the beginning to the end. He did not know before and he did not know now. In terms of status and power, he had already reached the peak of what an ordinary person could achieve. If he wanted to take another step forward, he would have to rebel and become the emperor. It was impossible for him to become the emperor of the Jing kingdom. It was even more impossible for him to become the emperor of the Wu kingdom, the Qi kingdom, and the Zhao kingdom. He really had no interest in becoming the emperor. Having reached this step, he did not want to go any further. In terms of family, his wife and concubines were beautiful. Some were gentle like water, and some were passionate like fire. The family was harmonious, and the husband and wife were harmonious. Except that sometimes his waist was weak, he had no other shortcomings. In terms of personal strength, he still had his goal. He did not want to dominate the martial arts world, and he did not expect to surpass Rui in his lifetime. He only wanted to become a guru before Rui and Emingzu, and teach them how to be a qualified sister-in-law and a qualified princess. It was a pity that this was his only dream, and it was hopeless. Rui and Mingzhu's breakthrough depended on luck, but he depended on fate. Therefore, he could only pursue other things. For example, when they were free, they could walk out of Wishful City, out of the Jing nation, and go to other places on this continent to have a look. That way his trip here would not be in vain. Jingping 3rd year. Warren 7th year. Zhengyuan 27th year. July. Li Xian walked out of his room and scratched his messy hair. Last night he had pulled an all-nighter to correct a few parameters. He then sent someone to the Academy of Engineering for further adjustments. Li Yi did not send him a red barbarian cannon, but he did send him a blueprint. After some modifications by the Academy of Science, the range and accuracy of the cannon had been improved slightly. Even after a sleepless night, he still looked full of energy. He laid down on the rocking chair outside, and took out a letter from his bosom. He muttered, "I can't believe he ran so fast. I wanted to go out incognito again." He received this letter 2 months ago. At that time, Li Yi and his family had left to travel. He had not received any letters in the past few months. He did not say where they went, nor did he say when they would be back. He took the letter back, feeling empty in his heart. He sighed and murmured, "When will these days come to an end?" A figure ran from afar. When he ran to Li Xian, he stopped and said respectfully, "Brother." Li Xian looked at him and asked, "Going to the Women's Academy again?" Li Han said sternly, "Royal sister asked me to train those mathematics teachers." Li Xian waved his hand and said, "Don't use this reason every time. I know you are looking for the girl called Duan Wu. I have said many times that a gentleman wants a fair lady. It's nothing." Li Han's face turned red. At 16 years old, he was only half a head shorter than Li Xian. A few years ago, he was a fatty who was extremely afraid of mathematics. Now he had become a handsome young man. Li Xian changed the topic. He looked at him and suddenly asked, "Little Han, you are already 16 years old this year, right?" Li Han nodded. Li Xian thought for a moment and said, 16 isn't young anymore. According to the marriage laws of the Jing Kingdom, it's a suitable age for marriage. Your mother has already mentioned it to me many times. It's time to arrange a marriage for you and wait 2 years before you get married. I think that Lady Duanwu looks very delicate and pretty, and her family background is also clean. Her family background isn't that much different now." A hint of joy appeared on Li Han's face. He forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart. Li Xian shook his head at this time and said, "But Duanwu is Li Yi's cousin and Li Yi is your teacher. In between there is a difference in seniority. This is not right, not right. I think you should choose a girl from the Wang family or the Yang family to be your princess." Li Han was stunned for a moment, and his face began to turn pale. Li Xian stood up from the rocking chair and said, "However, if you really like that girl Duanwu, it's fine. I can help you. But before that, you have to promise me something first." On this side, Li Xian and Li Han seemed to have entered into some kind of secret discussion. On the other side of the lake, the girl holding the sword knocked away the wooden sword in the hands of another girl. She nodded and said, "It's better than a few days ago." Again. The girl picked up the wooden sword and rushed over again. The clothes of the two figures fluttered in the wind. Their postures were beautiful and pleasing to the eye. On the side of the lake, 2 women looked over. On the left, a woman wearing a phoenix coronet withdrew her gaze from the 2 girls and looked at the other person next to her and said, "In the blink of an eye, Shanning has grown so big. If I remember correctly, after this year, she will be 18, right?" The woman on the right who looked younger nodded and said, "Sister remembers correctly. This year, Bingning is already 18 years old. Time makes people grow old. Now even Bingning has grown up. It seems that we are really old." The woman who was already the Empress Dowager sighed and said, "It's time to find a good husband for her. I'll ask Xian to pay more attention to see if there are any young talents in the capital city who are worthy of her." Concubine Yin shook her head and looked at the girl on the lawn and said, "Your Majesty is busy every day. Don't worry too much. Bingning, it's not time yet." The 3rd year of Jingping in the Jing Kingdom was the 7th year of Wuren in the Wu Kingdom and the 27th year of Zhenyuan in the Qi Kingdom. This year, for the Jing Kingdom, was a year of recuperation and continued growth. In the past few years, the people's taxes had been reduced again and again, but the national treasury was increasingly full. The agriculture and commerce went hand in hand, and the country's military strength was even more powerful. It seemed to be suppressing the Qi Kingdom and becoming the leader of all countries. Compared with the Jing Kingdom, the situation in the Wu Kingdom had changed dramatically. At the beginning of the 7th year of Wuren, eldest Princess Duanrong made a strong comeback and seized 6 provinces, including Sangzhou, Nanzhou, and Linzhou. Later, several provinces surrendered voluntarily. In the past 6 months, they had been recuperating and developing steadily. In a short time, they had taken over 17 provinces, which was almost half of the provinces controlled by the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom. In the 8th month of the 7th year of Wuren, when Princess Duanrong had taken over 20 provinces, the imperial court finally realized that Princess Duanrong and the others had the strength to overthrow them. On the 13th of the 8th month, the Wu Emperor issued another decree. He would personally lead an army of 200,000 to suppress the rebels. On the 14th of the 8th month, the Wu Emperor was assassinated in the palace. Several ministers rebelled. Fortunately, the other guards fought each other to the death. Although they killed the assassins, the Wu Emperor was also seriously injured. On the 15th of the 8th month, during the morning court session, a eunuch sent word that the Wu Emperor's personal expedition was cancelled in the 27th year of the Zhenyuan era. This year, the Qi Kingdom was not as peaceful as the Jing Kingdom. There was no turmoil like in the Wu Kingdom, and the emperor did not go on 2 consecutive personal expeditions. The emperor of the Qi Kingdom's health was deteriorating, but he was still far from death. The 2 princes were still fighting for the throne with all their might. The ministers in the imperial court were divided into 2 factions, neither giving way. The dispute was almost white-hot. In the autumn of the 27th year of the Zhenyuan era in the Qi Kingdom, Lin Yong strode into a small courtyard. Before he arrived, his voice reached the courtyard. "Miss, they'll be here soon." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.